Welcome. We apologize for the delay while the deliberative process was in full swing, but I understand that actually you all now understand the reason for the delay. It was in order to give Chairman Martin an opportunity to unveil Facebook's new pizza delivery service. Madam Secretary, would you like to lead us through today, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to you and good afternoon, Commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 3 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking that seeks comment on proposals to expand the amount of and access to video described programming for the benefit of consumers who are blind or visually impaired. Second, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking seeking comment on a proposed framework for ensuring that consumers have the tools they need to make informed choices about how their data is used and when it is shared by their broadband providers.
We're listening.
Okay. Third, you will consider a third report in order, further report in order, and order on reconsideration to comprehensively restructure and modernize the Lifeline program to efficiently and effectively connect low-income Americans to broadband, strengthen program oversight and administration, and take additional measures to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. This is your agenda for today. Please note the consent agenda as listed in the Commission's March 2016 Sunshine Notice has been deleted from today's agenda, and items 1, 3, 4, and 5 on the consent agenda were adopted by the Commission. The first item, entitled Video Description, Implementation of the 21st Century Communications and Visibility Accessibility Act, will be presented by the Media Bureau, and Bill Lake, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Lake.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
Today, the Media Bureau presents a notice of proposed rulemaking that proposes to increase the amount of video-described programming available to consumers and seeks comments on way to make it easier to access. Joining me at the table are Maria Malarkey and Lyle Elder of the Media Bureau's Policy Division. Lyle will present the item.
Thank you, Bill. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, we're pleased to present this notice of proposed rulemaking that is intended to improve the opportunities of persons who are blind and visually impaired to independently enjoy and follow popular television programs and more fully participate in the cultural experience that television offers. These proposals continue our efforts under the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act of 2010 to expand the availability of video-described programming. In 2010, the CVAA directed us to reinstate video description rules the Commission had previously adopted in the year 2000. Video description makes video programming more accessible to individuals who are blind or visually impaired, and the benefits of this service have proven to be substantial. The Commission was required to study the impact of those reinstated rules and to prepare a report on their impacts, benefits, and costs. That report was submitted to Congress in 2014. The CVAA gives the Commission continuing authority to adopt additional regulations beginning 2 years after submission of the report, if their benefits outweigh their costs. The NPRM tentatively concludes that the benefits of the proposals on which we seek comment do outweigh their costs. We propose to increase the amount of video-described programming carried on each included network by a total of 75%, which is the maximum percentage permitted under the statute. Under this proposal, each included network would be required to provide 87.5 hours of description per calendar quarter, or roughly 6 hours and 45 minutes of video-described programming each week. We also propose to increase the number of networks included in our video description rules. Currently, 4 broadcast and 5 non-broadcast networks are included. Under this proposal, the 5 most popular broadcast networks and 10 most popular non-broadcast networks would be included. These changes will substantially increase the amount of video-described programming available to consumers. The item seeks comment on the timeline for implementing these proposals. We also seek comment on proposals that will simplify the process for determining which networks are included within the rules. For example, we propose a no backsliding rule, under which an included network would continue to be included under the video description rules even if it became relatively less popular. In addition, we propose to eliminate the requirement that a network reach 50% of households in order to be included. Under our proposal, we would continue to revise the list of included non-broadcast networks on a triennial basis. We would also begin to do the same for broadcast networks, since we would be including the highest-rated fifth network in addition to ABC, CBS, Fox, and NBC, which are expressly covered under the reinstated rules. The item proposes a dedicated contact person or office at each broadcaster and MVPD with sufficient knowledge to assist consumers in resolving video description problems. It also proposes that petitions for exemption from the rules be filed electronically, and seeks comment on the timing for implementing these proposals. The item also seeks comment on, but makes no proposals, about several other issues. It seeks comment on a requirement that distributors identify video-described programming to program guides to improve consumer access to information about the availability of video-described programming. It seeks comment on a requirement that video-on-demand programming include video description if it has been previously carried on that MVPD with video description, as is currently required in the closed captioning context. It seeks comment on the state of the market with regard to the use of additional audio streams, and it seeks comment on the potential use going forward of the phrase audio description rather than video description by the Commission. The Media Bureau recommends that the Commission adopt this notice of proposed rulemaking and request editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Clyburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. During last week's House Subcommittee hearing, I previewed the mantra community, community, community. Today's Commission action furthers the goal of universal opportunity and cultural inclusiveness by helping individuals who are blind or visually impaired enjoy the same popular television programs as their friends, families, and others in the community. There are many wonderful benefits that have been realized since the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act was signed into law in October of 2010. Perhaps most important to me is the fact that this forward-looking law allows this agency to enhance the independence, productivity, and overall quality of life for millions. Today's notice of proposed rulemaking seeks to expand the availability of video-described programming by 75%. And consistent with the statute, the proposed increase from 50 hours per calendar year to 87.5 hours will make a big difference in the lives of individuals who are blind or visually impaired, allowing them to immerse themselves in programming in a way that the audio dialogue system alone simply does not provide. The notice seeks comment on whether the Commission's rules should include even more networks and if we should apply these requirements to video-on-demand programming. These questions remind us that our work when it comes to making programming more accessible will never be complete. And thankfully, the statute gives the Commission the authority to continually revisit whether we are satisfactorily meeting the communication needs of those who would benefit from video description. Last year marked the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, that landmark piece of legislation that forever changed the lives of countless Americans. Today's notice of proposed rulemaking makes yet another important milestone in the Commission's ongoing work to improve the lives and broadcast experiences of people who have or are experiencing vision loss. Thanks are due to the Media Bureau and the Consumer and Government Affairs Bureau for their work on this important item. The Commission's steadfast commitment to fulfilling the goals of the CVAA by expanding accessibility in communications for people who are blind or visually impaired will make an everlasting difference in the lives of millions of Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
It's a question we're all familiar with. What to watch? For most of us, the answer lies in a dizzying array of channels, an expanding number of screens, and an exploding range of on-demand programming. But for the 20 million Americans with vision loss, including an increasing number of veterans, answering this question is much more difficult. 6 years ago, this began to change when Congress passed the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. This law pried open the doors of digital age opportunity and provided broader access to video programming through video description. With video description, those with vision loss no longer miss facial expressions, visual jokes, or critical scene changes. That's because video description makes video programming accessible to individuals who are blind or visually impaired by inserting narrative descriptions of key visual elements in television programming. Ask anyone who is wrestling with vision loss. This is a policy that makes more programming more accessible to more of us. So today, the Commission takes steps to update its video description requirements. We ask about increasing the number of required hours of video description programming and the number of networks subject to our rules. At the same time, we consider how viewing habits are changing. We ask how our policies should apply in a world where there is so much programming on demand and scheduling our lives around an original air date is no longer necessary. These are important questions. I hope we can address them in short order, and I hope that as we do, we can also provide more answers to the time-worn question about what to watch for those who are visually impaired. So thank you to the Media Bureau and the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau for your efforts.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pai.
Just because a man lacks use of his eyes doesn't mean he lacks vision. Legendary musician Stevie Wonder once made that keen observation. In 2014, I had the privilege of meeting him and hearing his ideas for expanding the availability of video-described programming, basically a show in which one can listen to a narrator give an oral description of what is being shown on the screen. He told me how hearing such a description helped him envision what was happening and to integrate that information with the dialogue that he heard. Stevie Wonder isn't alone. Video description currently allows millions of blind and visually impaired Americans to more fully enjoy much of the quality programming that is being produced today during this golden age of television. Consider, for example, one of the most critical scenes from the AMC series Breaking Bad. Spoiler alert, but you've had plenty of time to binge watch as I did, so you're on your own. Hank is in Walt's bathroom. He finds the inscribed copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass and silently, for some time, tries to come to grips with the implication of that. Now, if you couldn't see the screen, and if nobody was describing to you what was happening, you would miss entirely Hank's realization that Walt was Heisenberg, a plot point that is central to the episodes that come. Now, Congress recognized the value of video description in the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act of 2010, the CVAA. In that law, it instructed the FCC to reinstate video description rules adopted by the Commission in 2000, but subsequently struck down by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. 1 year later, in 2011, the FCC did just that. Today, the Commission proposes to expand upon those regulations and require that more programming on more broadcast and non-broadcast networks be video described. And because I support increasing the availability of video description, I'm voting to approve in part. At the same time, I'm concerned that, taken together, the proposals in this notice of proposed rulemaking exceed the Commission's statutory authority. And regrettably, therefore, I must also dissent in part, and I'll briefly describe why. In the CVAA, Congress carefully limited the Commission's ability to expand upon our reinstated video description rules. In particular, Congress said that any additional regulations, and I quote, may not increase in total the hour requirement for additional described programming by more than 75% of the requirement in the reinstated regulations. Unfortunately, the proposals set forth in this notice of proposed rulemaking simply don't respect this congressionally imposed limit. And you can see this very high-tech chart I've prepared to illustrate why. Specifically, the reinstated regulations require 4 specific broadcast networks, ABC, CBS, Fox, and NBC, and the top 5 non-broadcast networks in the United States to each broadcast 50 hours of video-described programming per quarter. Now, that constitutes a total requirement of 450 hours per quarter, 9 networks times 50 hours. Pursuant to the CVAA, therefore, the Commission only has the authority to increase that total hours requirement by 75%, which, by my math, works out to an additional 337.5 hours per quarter of video-described programming. However, all of the proposals in this NPRM in combination would increase the amount of mandated video-described programming by at least 862 hours per quarter. That's the bar on the right. That would constitute a 192% increase in the total hours requirement. First, those 9 networks currently covered by the rules would have their quarterly requirement raised from 50 hours to 87.5 hours, an increase of 75%. And second, those same 87.5 hours quarterly requirement would be imposed upon 1 new broadcast network and 5 new non-broadcast networks. But the law is what the law is. I didn't make it up. And it simply doesn't allow the Commission to have its cake and eat it too. We can increase the per network hours requirement on existing networks by 75%, or perhaps we can impose video description requirements on additional programming networks so that increase in total hours is 75%. But Congress denied us the legal authority to do both. It bears noting that this 192% figure is a conservative estimate of the increase in the total hours requirement for video-described programming that would result from these proposals. Because the NPRM also proposes something called a no backsliding requirement. Under this rule, a top 5 broadcast network or a top 10 non-broadcast network would still be required to abide by our video description requirement, even if its viewership fell, and it was no longer a top 5 or a top 10 network. Over time, the Commission's regulations could end up applying to many more than 15 networks, and the total hours requirement could increase by much more than 192% over time. Essentially, this is the Hotel California approach to regulation. A network can check out of the upper ranks of viewership anytime it likes, but it can never leave our regulatory reach. Incredibly, the FCC even reinvents math. The NPRM explains that the, quote, top 5 will include ABC, CBS, Fox, and NBC, regardless of their relative rankings. And it goes on to say, in the event that one or more of those named networks suffers a sustained drop below 5th place in relative broadcast network rankings, the top 5 broadcast networks for the purposes of these rules could consist of more than 5 networks. Now, just reflect upon that for a moment. In the world of the FCC, the top 5 broadcast networks can mean more than the top 5 networks. This brings to mind the insistence of the party in George Orwell's 1984, that 2 plus 2 equals 5. In the hopes of reaching a compromise and, parenthetically, abiding by the law, as difficult as it might be, I suggested that we neutrally seek comment on a no backsliding requirement, as well as an extension of the video description requirement to additional networks. This would have given sufficient notice of these ideas for the public to have input, and it would have kept the proposed increase in the total hours requirement within the law. Additionally, it would have led to a unanimous vote without sacrificing the majority's ability to adopt any idea teed up in the NPRM. But, as is so often the case these days, this modest suggestion was rejected. It crossed some red line, the reason for which I cannot fathom. I'm therefore not optimistic about how the Commission will handle this proceeding going forward. But to quote Stevie Wonder, I hope my premonition misses and that we'll be able to work together to reach a consensus, one that makes video-described programming more available and also can withstand judicial review. I approve in part and dissent in part.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we take a step towards increasing the availability of video description to make television programming more accessible to those who are blind or visually impaired. This feature, made possible by many developments in video technology, has been found helpful or enjoyable by a number of visually impaired individuals as well as their families and friends. Ultimately, I could potentially support some expansion of our requirements in this area, and I support this process to consider the merits of doing so and to give the public an opportunity to weigh in. I appreciate the Chairman's willingness to flesh out some of the more specifics on the cost of the proposal. The cost-benefit analysis could be improved substantially, especially on the benefit side, and I hope to see updates and more data included if this initiative proceeds to the next stage. For instance, the sparseness of the cost-benefit analysis makes it difficult to assess the value of the no backsliding rule proposed. There must be some point at which highly ranked network can fall far enough in the ratings that the cost of compliance with these rules would be clearly outweighed the benefits. I thank the chairman for including an opportunity to comment about setting up an express exemption to address this concern. At the same time, I share my colleagues' disagreement regarding the statutory authority to expand the number of networks subject to these rules. Certainly, the proposed offered here would increase the total number hours requirement for all networks well beyond the 75% increase specified by the maximum in the law. Well, the version of the bill that passed the House of Representatives included a specific grant of authority for the Commission to increase the availability of video-described programming, which, according to the report, included an increase in the number of networks required to provide such programming or the number of hours required to be provided 10 years after enactment. This concept failed to garner sufficient support and was removed from the final version of the bill that was ultimately enacted into law. So it's implausible to think, and actually contrary to the canons of statutory construction, that we have authority to apply this rule to more networks now 6 years after enactment, when language that would have been allowed us to do this the same 10 years after enactment didn't even survive the legislative process. A final order following through on this specific proposal will be difficult for me to support, and therefore I must dissent on this part. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is a logical action to take. This is on a timeline that was established by Congress, and this is an important responsibility that we have. I have a statement for the record, but I will call for the vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. The item is carried. The request for editorial privileges is granted with the objection noted.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the next item on your agenda will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. It is entitled Protecting the Privacy of Customers of Broadband and Other Telecommunications Services, and Matt DelNero, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Mr. DelNero.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today, the Wireline Competition Bureau presents for your consideration a notice of proposed rulemaking that proposes a path forward to apply the privacy requirements of the Communications Act to the most significant communications technology of today, broadband internet access service. This NPRM proposes rules focused on three principles: transparency, choice, and security. These are the core privacy principles that animate critical steps federal and state lawmakers have long taken to protect the privacy of consumers' personal information across a variety of contexts. The NPRM also seeks broad comment on alternative ways of reaching these same core goals. The Wireline Competition Bureau drafted this NPRM with substantial input from and collaboration with many of the Commission's other bureaus and offices, and we are grateful to the numerous contributions to this project throughout the Commission. With me at the table are Associate Bureau Chief Lisa Hone, and from our Competition Policy Division, Dan Kahn, Melissa Kirkle, and David Brody. I would like to thank them and also John Visklowski, Sherwin C., Zach Ross, Christine Fargetstein, Tom Parisi, and Brian Hurley for their efforts in preparing the item before you. David Brody will now present the item.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Pursuant to the Commission's statutory responsibilities under Section 222 and other provisions of the Communications Act, this NPRM seeks to protect the privacy of the personal information of customers of broadband services. The NPRM proposes to implement core privacy principles to ensure that consumers first know what personal information their broadband providers collect and what providers do with that information. Second, can decide how their information is used and shared. And third, are protected against unauthorized disclosure of their information. The NPRM begins by proposing to define the information that would be protected under Section 222 and the proposed rules in the broadband context, including customer proprietary network information, or CPNI, and customer proprietary information. Next, in recognition of the widespread agreement that companies should inform consumers about their privacy practices, the NPRM proposes rules to enhance the ability of consumers to make informed choices through an effective disclosure of broadband providers' privacy policies. The NPRM then proposes a three-tiered framework for customer approval for the use and disclosure of customer proprietary information. First, the NPRM proposes to allow broadband providers to use and disclose customer information for various purposes consistent with customer expectations, including to provide broadband services or to market additional broadband offerings in the same category of services to which the customer already subscribes. Second, the NPRM proposes to allow broadband providers to use customer information or share such information with affiliates providing communications-related services in order to market communications-related services unless the customer affirmatively opts out of such practices. Third, the NPRM proposes to require broadband providers to seek and receive opt-in consent from their customers for all other uses and sharing of customer information. The NPRM seeks comment as well on alternatives to this framework for providing customers with choice over how their proprietary information is used and shared with their ISP. Next, recognizing that strong data security is crucial to protecting the confidentiality of customer information, the NPRM proposes a series of safeguards designed to protect customers' data from misappropriation, breach, and unlawful disclosure, and instill customer confidence in the security of their private data. The NPRM proposes a general data security standard, as well as some specific practices to implement that standard, to ensure that providers reasonably secure customer data. The NPRM also seeks comment on whether and how to address the collection, retention, and disposal of customer data. Next, the NPRM proposes data breach rules to ensure that all providers of telecommunications services, including broadband providers, notify customers and the appropriate federal authorities when customer proprietary information is used, disclosed, or accessed without authorization. The NPRM also seeks comment on whether there are certain broadband provider practices that should be prohibited, or to which heightened notice and choice requirements should apply, including deep packet inspection, financial inducement practices, and persistent tracking technologies. Finally, the NPRM invites discussion of other issues related to broadband privacy, such as dispute resolution and preemption, and seeks comment on various broadband privacy frameworks set forth by stakeholders. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
David, well done. Commissioner.
With an obvious delay or two, this morning for me was as typical as the last. Before opening my eyes, I reached for my smartphone, confirmed the weather so I knew just what to wear. I'm not sure if I passed that test. Checked the news in my home state and locally to see what happened while I slept. Looked at my social media account to follow the trends, very interesting today, and responded to emails and texts. And yes, engaged in some light e-commerce because I have not a thing to wear for next month's correspondence dinner. My smartphone engagement did not end with my drive to work, as my internet service provider can confirm. From that first feature of the day to the last action where every single night I fail to log off, my ISP knows which websites I visited, and if not encrypted, the content I visited on each website, how long I was on each website, and when I was in my house versus my car versus this office. This is a treasure trove of information that is not only very personal to me, but is also very valuable to marketers and retailers. As a consumer of these services, I want the ability to determine when and how my ISP uses my personal information, and I am not alone. According to a Pew Research survey, 93% of consumers say that being in control of who can access information about them is important. 90% say that controlling what information is collected about them is important. And 88% believe it is important that they not have someone watch or listen to them without their permission. So today's notice of proposed rulemaking is both timely and relevant. It seeks comment on proposals that would allow consumers to be in control of their information and ensure transparency, consumer choice, data breach notifications, and safeguards for security. The proposals will still allow ISPs to continue to track and collect information, provided the consumer is informed in a transparent way, and in most cases, after the consumer gives either opt-in or opt-out consent. It also seeks comment on all other proposals industries and groups have submitted to the FCC. Just about everything is on the table, and each and every one of you has the opportunity to make your case about the best path forward. I will listen and commit to maintaining an open mind as we approach final rules and an order. Much has been said about today's action, but the fact is that this is not new territory for the FCC. This notice builds on decades of precedent and the FCC's explicit statutory authority to ensure that network providers protect proprietary information and give consumers the power of choice. And if I were to think back on my actions earlier this morning and compare them to what my 1990s telephone provider knew about me versus the information collected by my ISP today, let me just say that there is absolutely no comparison. My 1990s provider would only know when if my day got started, if I dialed someone or was called, and could identify the person on the person's number and length of that particular call. And still, Congress believed it was appropriate to create separate statutory provisions to create a duty for carriers to protect the confidentiality of that information. So yes, today I am proud to stand on the side of the 90% of the consumers who want the ability to control what happens with their very personal and private information. Times have changed, and we need to ensure that our rules are updated to reflect these technological transformations. I want to thank the team of the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Office of General Counsel for their expertise and dedication as reflected in this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Check your phone, turn on the television, or pick up a newspaper. Wherever you look, privacy is in the headlines. From debates about encryption to discussions of data security and cybersecurity, privacy is making news and making its mark on our economy and our consciousness. And that's because a number of forces have collided to make privacy both more important and more complicated. First, connection is no longer merely convenient. We live in an always-on world. Our commercial and civic lives are migrating to online platforms with ferocious force and speed. The opportunity to opt out of this new digital age is limited. Its advances are too bountiful. They save us time and money, and they inform all aspects of modern life. Second, the number of parties participating in our digital age connections and transactions has multiplied exponentially. It used to be that the lone communications relationship was between a customer and his or her carrier. No more. Today, you can dial a call, write an email, post an update on your social network, read a news site, store your family photographs in the cloud, and you should assume that service providers, advertising networks, and companies specializing in analytics have access to your personal information, and lots of it for a long time. Our digital footprints are hardly in sand. They are effectively in wet cement. Third, the monetization of this data is big business. The cost of data storage has declined dramatically, and the market incentives to keep our data and slice and dice it to inform economic activity are enormous. They are only going to grow. Now, to be clear, together these forces can do a whole lot of good. They can make us more effective, more efficient. They can make our cities smarter and our communities more connected. But as consumers navigate this new digital landscape, they are anxious. According to the Pew Research Center, 9 out of 10 Americans believe that it is important to control what information is collected about themselves, and an even greater number believe it is important to be in control of who can get that information. At the same time, consumers know there is a value proposition associated with sharing their information. In fact, over half of consumers would agree to do so in exchange for something free. And that might sound familiar to any one of us who has paused, just barely, to review the fine print online before swiftly checking a box to enjoy the wonder of free shipping. So there are some contradictions here that make privacy complicated. At the same time, it is clear that under Section 222, customer proprietary network information is entitled to protection. Moreover, the Commission has a responsibility to ensure that its privacy policies adopted under this section reflect the current communications landscape. To this end, today we start a process to update our Section 222 rules so they no longer only reflect voice services, but also encompass broadband. And it's my hope that along the way, we can harmonize our efforts under Section 222 with the other privacy provisions in the Communications Act, including Section 631. Now, to get this done, this rulemaking asks questions. Lots and lots of questions. Get ready, because by my quick count, there are more than 500 of them. We ask questions about notice and how to ensure broadband providers have transparent policies. We ask questions about what requires consumer opt-in and what is better suited for opt-out. We ask about what to do to ensure data is secure and what recourse consumers deserve when it is compromised. Now, though these questions range far and wide, it is important to be clear about what this rulemaking does not do. The Section 222 privacy provisions involve carriers. They do not apply to the manufacturers of wireless phones. They do not apply to the developers of operating systems, nor do they apply to websites. So let's be honest. Consumers can be confused by these distinctions. But the scope of this proceeding in Section 222 is limited. So I hope as we progress, we think about how consumers can better understand the way their data is collected, what rules apply, and how they can protect themselves. I believe that doing this well requires harmonization within the Communications Act and with other federal partners with privacy interests. Because in the broadband age, consumers should not have to be network engineers to understand who is collecting their data, and they should not have to be lawyers to determine if their information is protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pai.
For many years, the United States embraced a technology-neutral framework for online privacy. The Federal Trade Commission applied a unified approach to all online actors. That framework allowed the FTC to carry out more than 150 privacy and data security enforcement actions, including actions against ISPs and against some of the biggest companies in the Internet ecosystem. And that's the same framework that the United States government has told the European Union is sufficiently robust to protect online consumers against predatory private practices. The FCC tore apart that unified framework 13 months ago when it reclassified broadband as a public utility. So I agree with my colleagues that we do need to act to refill the deep hole in privacy protections dug by the Commission. What's the best way to refill it? Well, I can't put it any better than Chairman Wheeler did, testifying before the House Energy and Commerce Committee's Subcommittee on Communications and Technology in November 2015. Because consumers deserve a uniform expectation of privacy, the FCC, quote, will not be regulating the edge providers differently, unquote, from internet service providers. And when it comes to privacy, the principle of parity makes sense. As the FTC concluded years before being evicted from the space, any privacy framework should be technology neutral, because ISPs are just one type of large platform provider, and operating systems and browsers may be in a position to track all, or virtually all, of a consumer's online activity to create highly detailed profiles. But today, the Commission digs yet another hole in trying to fill the first one. Instead of respecting both common sense and last fall's public commitment to Congress, the FCC tilts the regulatory playing field by proposing to impose more burdensome regulation on internet service providers than the FTC imposes upon so-called edge providers. But consumers don't necessarily know which particular online entities can access their personal information, let alone the regulatory classification of those entities. They do care that their personal information is protected by everyone who has access to it. And more broadly, it makes little sense to give some companies greater leeway under the law than others when all have access to that very same personal data. This disparate approach doesn't benefit consumers or the public interest. It simply favors one set of corporate interests over another. Now, slanted regulation is bad enough. Illogically slanted regulation is even worse. For here's the reality. There is no good reason to single out ISPs, new entrants in the online advertising space, for disparate treatment. As explained by one recent study by President Clinton's chief privacy counsel and President Obama's special assistant for economic policy, I quote, the 10 leading ad-selling companies earn over 70% of online advertising dollars, and none of them has gained this position based on its role as an ISP. And that's because ISPs, as the study put it, have neither comprehensive nor unique access to information about users' online activity. Rather, the most commercially valuable information about online users is coming from other contexts. Or consider what former Democratic Representative Rick Boucher said just this week. By the end of this year, 70% of internet traffic will be encrypted and beyond the surveillance of ISPs. And just think of how we experience the internet in our digital lives. Search engines log every query that you enter. Social networks track every person you've ever met. Online video distributors know every show you've ever streamed. Online shopping sites record every book, every piece of furniture, every formal dress you browse, let alone purchase. To quote the chairman's press release, every day consumers hand over very personal information simply by using the broadband services they've paid for. And to paraphrase the notice, online operators have the commercial motivation to use and share extensive and personal information about their customers. Any review of recent headlines makes this obvious. Microsoft admits Windows 10 automatic spying cannot be stopped. Hidden iPhone feature tracks your every move. Facebook's ad platform now guesses at your race based on your behavior. Google is spying on K-12 students, privacy advocates warn. Your Samsung TV is eavesdropping on your private conversations. Why is Netflix cracking down on essential privacy tools? Yahoo escalates the war on ad blockers by keeping people out of their own email. All headlines plucked out of off the web just in the last couple of months. It's clear that online companies now have greater access to consumer data than ever before, and that the success of their business models depends upon their ability to use it. Ironically, selectively burdening ISPs, their nascent competitors in online advertising, confers a windfall to those who are already winning. Now, despite this digital reality, the FCC targets ISPs and only ISPs for regulation. Now, legal constraints can't be the reason. In the National Broadband Plan of 2010 and in broadband deployment reports issued since, the FCC has concluded consistently that privacy concerns can serve as a barrier to the adoption and utilization of broadband. And under the Commission's expansive reading of the Telecommunications Act and the virtuous cycle theory of legal authority ascribed to by those voting for today's notice, a reading I don't support, to be clear, the FCC can take practically any action necessary to break down those barriers. Remember, too, that this agency hasn't been shy about pushing legal boundaries. Its deliberate indifference to the law in other contexts has been repeatedly rebuked by the courts and sharply rejected by members of both parties in Congress in just the last month alone. So creating a disparate privacy regime isn't the product of legal restraints. It's simply a political choice. And perhaps all of this is why the Electronic Privacy Information Center has cried foul, writing that the FCC's maniacal focus on ISPs is, as they put it, inconsistent with the reality of the online communications ecosystem, incorrectly frames the scope of communications privacy issues facing Americans today, and is counterproductive to consumer privacy. Other than that, they seem to be big fans. Now, recent events confirm the wisdom of Epic's perspective. Reclassification's chief corporate backer, Netflix, admitted just last week that it has selectively throttled its own customers' traffic without their knowledge and without their consent. This is precisely the kind of conduct that the FCC hypothesized last year, when it claimed that companies have the economic incentives and the technical ability to engage in practices that pose a threat to Internet openness by harming network providers, edge providers, and end users. Except that the FCC stated, without any evidence, that every one of the country's 4,462 ISPs were a threat to Internet openness, and the tech giants, by definition, were not. To borrow from President Nixon's press secretary, that statement is no longer operative. My position on this issue is pretty simple. Online consumers should and do have a uniform expectation of privacy. That expectation should be reflected in uniform regulation of all companies in the Internet ecosystem. That's the model we had during a decade of FTC regulatory oversight. That's the model that gave us an Internet economy that's the envy of the world. Because the FCC rejects this bipartisan approach in favor of corporate favoritism, I dissent.
Got it. Thank you. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This notice flows directly from last year's misguided net neutrality order and its flawed decision to reclassify broadband as a Title II service. So I expected to have threshold questions and concerns about the authority to regulate the privacy practices of Internet service providers. I had hoped, however, that the agency would at least take time to outline a thoughtful approach to privacy. As someone who has spent a great deal of time on various privacy efforts and legislation, I know these issues can be very complex. Therefore, it would make sense for an agency with so little expertise on privacy to engage in regulatory humility and proceed incrementally. But instead of taking time to understand the current privacy landscape, including the FTC's well-regarded standards and body of precedent, the notice falls back on the familiar cut and paste job attempting to force customer proprietary network information rules and definitions onto broadband. The Commission also sets off on a statutory fishing expedition to find new language to support additional privacy rules before finally proposing to shift key functions of the Internet economy to an opt-in regime that previously has been reserved for the most sensitive of information. And that's just the privacy section. An alarming display of doublethink. The notice also proposes new cybersecurity rules. At the same time, there is a policy statement circulating amongst the commissioners that claims the FCC will take a voluntary approach in this area. Similarly, the item's approach to data breach notifications could result in consumers receiving inapplicable information, while at the same time, the FCC's approach to Telephone Consumer Protection Act is preventing other consumers from receiving legitimate and necessary notifications. Starting with legal authority, I oppose the decision to reclassify broadband ISPs as a telecommunications carrier and do not believe that they are subject to the regulation under Title II. Yet even if that decision holds up in court, I would still disagree with the Commission's authority to regulate broadband privacy practices. All the details are provided in my written statement, but for now, suffice it to say that few, if any, of those involved with the creation of Section 222, the primary authority claimed, could have ever dreamt that the language would be stretched this far. The entire effort to do so brings to mind a certain expression about square pegs and round holes. And I had thought that the reason for conducting this rulemaking was that the Commission thought the current CP&I rules were not a good fit for broadband. As a backup for the imaginary authority provided by Section 222, the majority reverts to the familiar shotgun approach, referring to 201, 202, 303B, 316, 705 of the Communications Act, as well as Title 18 of the U.S. Code. The problem with citing original provisions of the Communications Act is that they were clearly never intended to cover such conduct. Moreover, why would Congress subsequently have adopted a privacy provision for telephone call records, Section 222, if all of the other sections already contained the necessary authority to regulate privacy and security? Such a reading would render the entire provision superfluous. Of course, no controversial item would be complete without citing Section 706 of the 96 Act and the virtuous cycle, and my views on that are well known. But it's particularly ludicrous here, given that only 1% of broadband non-adopters listed privacy and security concerns as a primary reason for not using the Internet at home. Having mangled the statute, the notice proceeds to upend existing privacy structures that, by most accounts, have been providing sufficient protection for consumers, including broadband customers. The only intervening change is that the reclassification gave certain stakeholders another bite at the apple to achieve everything on their privacy wish lists. So, in yet another proceeding, instead of making incremental changes, like those offered by industry groups to align any FCC rules with the well-established FTC standards and a precedent, the Commission decides to go into the extreme direction, possibly jeopardizing the entire effort. Under the FTC's choice framework, the privacy baseline is set so that it is consistent with the privacy preferences of most consumers. Accordingly, whether a practice requires choice turns on the extent to which the practice is consistent with the context for the transaction or the customer's existing relationship with the business, or is required or specifically authorized by law. Given the FTC's long history and expertise with consumer privacy expectations, it has been determined that consent is not needed for many common activities, while others require consumer choice. However, the highest degree of protection, opt-in, is reserved for specified uses like making material retroactive changes to privacy representations or collecting sensitive information, such as information about children, financial and health information, social security numbers, and precise geolocation data. This stands in sharp contrast to the notice, which seeks to override consumer preferences with the Commission's own policy choices. Instead of setting a baseline and making adjustments over time to adjust to any actual instances of harm, the FCC would mandate specific privacy practices up front. The notice proposes a rigid consent regime that assigns one of the three categories, inferred, opt-out, and opt-in, based on the entity accessing the information, irrespective of the consumer expectations. Under the proposal, the bulk of activities would fall into opt-out and opt-in categories. In fact, opt-in would be the default, another catch-all for all situations not expressly discussed in the item, regardless of how most consumers view such uses. Additionally, the notice goes so far as to suggest that some privacy practices may be prohibited under the Act. That is, the FCC could take away consumer choice altogether. So much for the promise that the fact sheet said that it's about permission and protection, not prohibition. What are these practices that are so harmful that they might need to be banned? Well, contrary to certain statements to the press, one of them is a popular program offered by major provider that enables consumers to receive a discounted price for premium service if they agree to allow the company to use their web browsing information to provide tailored ads. The notice acknowledges that a substantial majority of customers elected to participate in the program. However, it cautions that consumers in these type of situations may not understand what they are trading. Really? The notice makes no effort to explain why ISPs and their customers should be subject to more onerous consent requirements and no choice at all. Instead, the Commission simply assumes its conclusions and seeks confirmation that it is right. Indeed, there is no reason for the notice to describe consumer expectations because it's irrelevant to the FCC's analysis. The agency knows best and must save consumers from their poor privacy choices. I find this regulatory paternalism to be extremely offensive as well as unwarranted, given that the FTC framework had protected broadband consumers' privacy until reclassification removed that authority. The notice does not identify any flaws in that framework that would require a different approach here. The only answer seems to be that the FCC is seizing the chance to up the ante, whether consumers want it or not, in order to be seen as the true defender of consumer privacy. I see little reason to believe that this new regime would not impede innovation and disrupt the inner working of the Internet. By mandating unnecessary and for some consumers unwanted privacy practices, the Commission increases cost for businesses. The opt-in regime in particular will impair the ability of companies to develop new uses for information, cutting them off before ever exploring the possibilities and positives in the marketplace that could provide additional revenue streams and that consumers might find beneficial. That means less capital to invest in broadband deployment, higher prices and fewer choices for consumers, and slower adoption. In short, it would initiate a vicious cycle. Additionally, applying heightened standards to one segment of the Internet economy will hamstring competition with the largest users of consumer data. The FCC seeks comment on the issue, but also notes that the FTC could simply vigorously enforce its own rules. That's not a fair suggestion because, as I've already noted, it's a completely different rule book. Shifting gears a bit, I was not shocked to see that the notice also addresses data security, given prior enforcement actions on the subject. I was surprised, however, that it would contradict the other cybersecurity item already on circulation. That policy statement, which seems dubious in its own right, sets forth a process for carriers to meet with the Commission, supposedly on a voluntary basis, to discuss risk management practices. Ever since I watched one of the advisory committee meetings and heard the term voluntary was being defined, I had deep suspicions about whether that process would truly be optional for the providers. Here, the notice confirms my concerns by proposing that carriers conduct regular risk management assessments and even seeks comment on whether the FCC should specify the manner in which risk management assessments should be designed and conducted instead of allowing the biased providers to determine the specifics. It is important to note that while cybersecurity is important, the Act does not provide the FCC with any statutory authority in this space. The Commission also continues to struggle to find the right balance on data breach notifications. In last year's TCPA omnibus order, the Commission provided an extremely narrow exception to TCPA liability to permit one class of companies to make a limited number of calls per event. Moreover, the relief was subject to conditions that have made it unworkable in practice. In this notice, the Commission would mandate that a class of companies contact consumers in the event of a breach and within a certain amount of time. However, it takes time for a company to investigate whether a data breach has actually occurred and determine the scope of the impact. If companies have to notify consumers before they have all the facts, it may be over-inclusive, leading to customer confusion. I hope the Commission will be open to adjusting its proposal as it hears from outside parties with more experience with these situations. In addition to the major substantive concerns, I was alarmed to see the Commission acting on issues that should be completely outside the scope of this proceeding and its jurisdiction, such as mandatory arbitration clauses in contracts with their customers. I am also compelled to remark on a term that is used in more than a dozen times throughout this item: harmonize. It seems that this is a new code word for increasing regulation. The Commission proposes expanding CP&I for broadband and then seeks comment on harmonizing the rules for voice, as if we need to pile on new obligations for legacy voice service. Likewise, the Commission seeks to harmonize this new proposal with rules applicable to video service. Of course, by the time the Commission gets around to changing those rules, it will doubtlessly find other necessary harmonization need improvements as well, and it will require further harmonization. Pretty soon, we'll end up with a regulatory arms race. Finally, I must raise a reality check about how ISPs may use the collected information. Unlike government entities using the information to potentially threaten and undo the freedom of individuals, The high crime and misdemeanor at issue here is the ultimate desire of some to want to market a commercial product to others. Simply put, they want to try to sell you something that you may actually enjoy purchasing. It is as if we all forgot how the internet economy actually works today. There's a trade-off. Consumers receive free stuff offered by internet companies, while in return, the companies receive other things, such as data to place targeted ads, and consumers may or may not want, but at the same time, may be completely comfortable within the context of the overall package. Heightening the limitations on the use of information as contemplated by this item will impact every other pricing component of internet access and eventually edge providers. Well, I would have not been able to support this item in any event, as it is based on a flawed legal theory. I had hoped, for the sake of institutional credibility, that the policy framework would be a sensible one. Unfortunately, that is not the case, and I must dissent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. First of all, thank you to the team. As we have all heard, this is a complex, challenging kind of issue. And you all have broken your picks and done a great job working hard, bringing us to this point, and we all want to say thank you to you for that. I've got a statement for the record, but we've heard a lot of assertions, allegations, and alarms up here recently. But there is one indisputable fact. And that is that it's the consumer's information. And the consumer should have the right to say whether it is used for non-network purposes. We heard a minute ago about commercial products available on the web. Yep. The question is, should the consumer, without their knowledge or permission, be one of those commercial products? When a consumer makes a phone call, all the information about that call is protected unless the consumer authorizes its disclosure. How does the fact that the network is connecting to the internet rather than to a telephone make the expectation of consumer privacy any different? So at the risk of being redundant, it's the consumer's information. And the consumer should have the right to determine how it's used. So, I'll call for the vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. The request for editorial privilege is granted with the objection noted. Next item, Madam Secretary.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the last item on your agenda today will be presented again by the Wireline Competition Bureau. It is entitled Lifeline and Link-Up Reform and Modernization.
Are you driving here as well, Matt? Or yeah, boy, you know.
Thought I'd just stay. I'm very comfortable.
Go for it.
Okay. You have everybody? Great. Thank you. Good afternoon again, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I am pleased to present to you a third report in order, further report in order, and order on reconsideration that focuses the Lifeline program on making broadband affordable for low-income consumers, all so that Lifeline subscribers can take full advantage of the benefits reliable internet access can bring. The order also would take important steps to encourage more competition among providers in the Lifeline marketplace, to improve Lifeline's management and design, and to build on the reforms the Commission implemented in 2012 to further protect the integrity of the Lifeline program. In preparing this item, staff of the Wireline Bureau worked closely with colleagues in the Office of Managing Director, Office of Native Affairs and Policy, Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, Office of General Counsel, and the Wireless Bureau, among others. In addition to those at the table with me, I would like to acknowledge the Lifeline team for their hard work and dedication to modernizing the program for the 21st century. And with me at the table is Wireless Telecommunications Bureau Chief John Wilkins, although I hear he's still doing some OMD work. It's
almost
hard
done.
to. All right. And from the Wireline Bureau, Trent Harcrater, Ryan Palmer, Dr. Jay Schwartz, and Jody Griffin, as well as Anita Patanker-Stoll of the Office of Managing Director. Jody will now present the item.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
The item we present to you today builds on the Commission's commitment to promoting meaningful access to fast, fair, and open broadband networks by modernizing the Lifeline program for low-income consumers across the country. The reforms that the order, if adopted, would make are comprehensive, covering the services supported, the administration of the program integrity, and other factors. In the interest of time, I will highlight some of the key reforms here. Of note, the order enables Lifeline support for robust, standalone, fixed, and mobile broadband services, in addition to supporting bundled voice and broadband options. The order also balances consumers' reliance on existing services, affordability, and the need for robust modern service offerings by establishing a 5.5-year transition period, at the end of which virtually all Lifeline consumers will have access to the preeminent communications infrastructure of the 21st century, broadband. During that transition period, providers will receive Lifeline support for plans that meet applicable minimum standards for either a broadband service or a voice service. For instance, consider a mobile provider delivering Lifeline service to low-income consumers. For the 12-month period beginning on December 1st, 2016, the provider would receive support in connection with any qualifying plan that provides low-income consumers at least 500 megabytes of data, or that includes at least 500 minutes of voice service. This transition will continue on a graduated basis through December 2021. By that point, all consumers relying on Lifeline-supported service, whether on a fixed or mobile platform, will have access to the Internet through that service. The only exception would be in census blocks with a single Lifeline provider. However, recognizing a degree of inherent uncertainty in the future Lifeline marketplace, this order also directs the Bureau to submit to the Commission a State of the Lifeline Marketplace report by June 30th, 2021, well before the scheduled phase-down of mobile and fixed voice-only support in December of that year. This is to enable the full Commission to make any changes it deems necessary to the support levels or minimum service standards. Another cornerstone of the order is the establishment of the National Lifeline Eligibility Verifier. The verifier will hold responsibility for eligibility determinations, a change from the current approach in which Lifeline providers themselves verify subscribers. This approach curtails opportunities for abuse while at the same time reducing administrative burdens on providers in the program. The order also streamlines the criteria for Lifeline eligibility, for example, by removing certain programs while adding the Veterans Pension Benefit Program and retaining the option for consumers to qualify based on income. To encourage competition in the Lifeline program to the benefit of low-income consumers, the order creates a streamlined federal Lifeline broadband provider designation process. This new designation process provides an additional alternative to the current state-level eligible telecommunications carrier designation processes, which will remain in place. This order also recognizes the importance of fiscal responsibility in the Lifeline program and, for the first time, establishes a cost control mechanism for the program. The order sets an annual budget at $2.25 billion and directs FCC staff to submit a comprehensive report with recommendations to the Commission if Lifeline disbursements in a year exceed 90% of that budget, with an expectation that the Commission will act within 6 months of this report. The order also recognizes that, although cost is the primary barrier to broadband adoption, increasing digital inclusion means more than just addressing the affordability of broadband service. The order will therefore requires Lifeline providers to make available Wi-Fi enabled devices when providing devices with the Lifeline supported service, and requires Lifeline mobile broadband service providers to make available hotspot enabled devices. The order also directs the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau to develop and execute a digital inclusion plan that will bring together a variety of stakeholders to determine how Lifeline can best be used to close the digital divide. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy. Commissioner Clyburn.
Just over 2 years ago, I expressed my desire to revamp and modernize the FCC's only means-tested program designed to address head-on the affordability gap faced by millions of economically vulnerable Americans when it comes to critical telecommunication services. My vision was well-intentioned and simple: to reform a program that for the past 30 years has been stuck in an analog time warp and beam that program into the 21st century, making it future-proof, competitive, and loaded with choice for deserving consumers. That simple objective is now codified in 200-plus pages, which means that there are levels of complexity that will ensure that more providers participate and that more qualified consumers currently stuck on the wrong side of the universal opportunities divide become digitally connected. Recently, I had an opportunity to meet Bridget, a re-entry student from San Francisco, California. After being laid off from her job, she enrolled in a Bay Area city college to get the training she needs to be successful in the next phase of her professional journey. But as she reviewed the requirements of her program coursework, a cruel reality threatened to short-circuit her long-term goals. In order to fulfill the homework assignments for 4 out of 5 of those classes, she needed access to the internet. However, for her, broadband is currently a luxury she simply cannot afford. Unlike many of her classmates who are able to complete their assignments, check their grades, and communicate with their instructors from home or on the go, Bridget has had to plot and plan and scheme when it comes to getting connected. She jokingly refers to herself as a Wi-Fi troll, one who constantly searches for one signal after the other. After that high-tech learning center on campus and the school libraries, after they close at 6 p.m. and 6:45 p.m. respectively. Bridget cannot afford to purchase food or drinks in the coffee shops that offer free Wi-Fi, so she often sits outside on the sidewalks to take advantage of their signal. That is, until she is asked to leave. She has been known even to enter a hotel lobby or two, sneak on the elevator, return to the lobby pretending to be a guest, and ask that front desk attendant for the hotel's internet access code so she could complete her home assignment as she sits down in the lobby. As crafty or as clever as Bridget is, her methods are not always effective or safe. She has been literally chased out of neighborhoods. She's had to repeat a class or two. And as a result of all of this and more, her grades have suffered. The stress of completing coursework is hard enough, but the burden of finding a connection and resorting to trolling for a Wi-Fi signal is a sacrifice. There are sacrifices that someone trying to benefit and better themselves should not be forced to make. While her methods may seem extreme to some, her challenge is one that tens of millions of Americans face every day. And did I mention that Bridget is currently one of our 10-plus million Lifeline customers, and that her plan is limited to voice? So just imagine what Bridget could realize if that plan not only supported voice, but data. The same day I met Bridget, I met Shavana from Jackson, Mississippi, who works at an area high school, goes to college, and is a mother of 2 children. She spends too many evenings in the local McDonald's, not because she believes that the menu offerings would satisfy the nutritional needs of her family, but because once she leaves work and once the community library closes, she has a difficult choice to make. Does she take her tired and hungry children home? Does she neglect completing her homework assignment and fall further behind in her studies? Or does this Lifeline qualified single mom take advantage of the only connection truly available to her at that hour, which is inside the lobby of a fast food restaurant? Ladies like Shavonna and Bridget, along with men, women, children, seniors, veterans, they're stuck on the wrong side of the communications divide, and why this day is so important to them should be clear. They're struggling to make ends meet. They're struggling to feed their families and to better themselves educationally, professionally, and medically. And their goal is not to forever qualify for the Lifeline program, but they should be able to fully take advantage of a reform program that could be the bridge for them to better themselves, to increase their opportunities, to make their way of life more bearable. So the FCC frequent flyers that sit in here and watch look at $9.25 as a price they do not think twice about paying when they order a number 2 combo at the airport. But for those who qualify for Lifeline, $9.25 per month per household could make the difference between access or not. In creating this program over 30 years ago, the FCC found, and I quote, that access to telephone service has become crucial to full participation in our society and economy, which are increasingly dependent upon the rapid exchange of information. In many cases, particularly for the elderly, poor, and disabled, the telephone is truly a lifeline to the outside world. Our responsibilities under the Communications Act require us to take steps to prevent degradation of universal service and the division of our society into information haves and have-nots, end quote. Technologies may change, but the role that communication services play in bringing communities together and bridging divides remain as vital as it was in 1985. While years overdue, I am proud to support today's unveiling of a 21st century program with more oversight and protections against waste, fraud, and abuse than any of our other universal service programs. When I outlined my vision for Lifeline reform at the American Enterprise Institute almost 18 months ago, I spoke of a dignified program that streamlines provider participation to promote more choice, mandates a neutral third-party verifier to determine program eligibility, and creates minimum standards that will prevent second-class or inferior services. Consumers who are currently low income should have choices comparable to what I have in terms of service options and price ranges, and they should never be made to feel ashamed or carry a stigma if they qualify a program to which we all contribute. And while I have been steadfast in my commitment for minimum standards, I made clear from the start that I was open to making course corrections and receiving feedback. I heard loud and clear that the transition to minimum standards for mobile voice was too much, too soon, so I worked with the chairman to extend the transition to a more gradual glide path and treat mobile and fixed voice the same. While I would have created a different path for provider participation that delinked the ETC from the program as we do in E-rate in rural health care, more choice and more options will benefit everyone. I hope, despite a different legal approach, that the path today achieves these same goals. And yes, I heard loud and clear concerns from our state partners and work to balance those concerns by ensuring that states that include funding for their own Lifeline program will not be preempted, and any provider that wants state funding must go through the respective states' process. But one of the reforms I am most proud is that we will eradicate the incentives for waste, fraud, and abuse that have existed since support was extended to prepaid wireless services resellers. The agency, most notably this administration, deserves a lot of credit for the 2012 bipartisan reforms to Lifeline that short-circuited long-standing loopholes and have saved consumers over $2.75 billion. Today, we take further steps to close remaining vulnerabilities, which ensures that universal service funding only flows if a provider uses a neutral third-party verifier, which determines whether each customer is eligible. The database confirms that no one in the household already has service, and minimum standards are met. With these reforms in place, I would challenge anyone to find incentives for waste, fraud, and abuse. In fact, approval of this order, as I just stated, will make Lifeline the best managed of our universal service programs, and we are on the road of moving from simply making sound bites to real reform, and we are creating a template and an effort that I hope will be followed as we further reform our other universal service programs. Finally, I must address the elephant in the room, the delay in the meeting and the rumors surrounding a proposed cap on the Lifeline program. I have been consistent in saying that a cap should not be imposed, and to be honest and completely transparent, I continue to hold that view. However, I have also been steadfast in my desire to reach consensus and seek compromise whenever possible, and I remain vocal in my call for fiscal responsibility for our universal service programs, all of which are capped except for Lifeline. So I negotiated in good faith to have a budget mechanism in place that ensures millions of new households will have the opportunity to afford advanced telecommunication services. Upon further deliberation, I concluded that such a mechanism could not fully achieve my vision of a 21st century Lifeline program, but I applaud the deliberative process and thank Commissioners Pye and O'Reilly and their staff for engaging well into the night and early this morning. I must sincerely thank Chairman Wheeler for his support, commitment, and yes, his patience as we transform this critical program. Through today's action, we affirm without a doubt that both the goals and the administration of the Lifeline program share equal weight with the goals and objectives of our other universal service programs. I also want to thank the dedicated staff at the FCC, including John Wilkins, as well as the stellar Lifeline team from the Wireline Competition Bureau led by Matt DelNero. And I cannot close today without recognizing the unwavering commitment of my Wireline advisor, Rebecca Goodhart, who is not here. I think I ran her to a doctor's appointment, but she left these offices just before midnight, was communicative up until 2 a.m., I can verify that, and was at her desk at 8 a.m. this morning. To Rebecca and her family, thank you for your commitment to public service and regulatory excellence. I am grateful today for those millions of Americans who will once and for all benefit from a program that meets the 21st century needs of those most vulnerable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for those stories and for your leadership on this issue. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
For over 3 decades, the Lifeline program has helped the neediest among us connect to family, jobs, health care, and help when emergency strikes. These connections make us stronger. That is why, over time, the Commission updated the Lifetime program to include both wireline and wireless voice services. And today, we continue on this course by updating the Lifeline program to include broadband. This change is overdue, because connectivity today is so much more than it was when this program got its start and most communications involved a phone cord. Today, getting connected means getting online, and it is time for the Lifeline program to reflect this reality. So I support today's decision to modernize this program and update it to include broadband. I also support this effort because it brings new accountability and internal controls to the program. We put in place minimum standards and we adopt fiscal controls. We also create a national verifier to improve administration and take the customer eligibility process out of the hands of providers who would abuse it. In addition, we bring new transparency to the program by making information about subscriber counts publicly available to all. These are good things, and this is progress. But above all, I support today's decision because it helps narrow the cruelest part of our new digital divide, the homework gap. And let me explain by taking us for a moment to McAllen, Texas. McAllen is one of the southernmost cities in the United States. It lies in the storied Rio Grande Valley, right on the river itself. In the last century, McAllen was a community devoted to agriculture. Its fields produced cotton, alfalfa, grapes, and figs. In later years, the economy grew with oil exploration, and still later, it became a foreign trade zone with cross-border commercial traffic, making it one of the fastest-growing metropolitan areas in the country. But like so many other places, this transition to a new economy has been uneven. Jobs are harder to come by. Healthcare is a challenge, and diabetes has hit the community hard. So not every household or every neighborhood has found opportunity in what is new or what comes next. This is painfully clear when you look at the students in this community. Take Isabella and Tony Ruiz. Isabella is 11 and her brother Tony is 12. Every weeknight, they stand on a crumbling patch of sidewalk across from the elementary school near their home. They take up residence here as night falls in order to pick up the wireless signal they need to do their homework. Over the cracked screen of the family smartphone, they download math materials and review research for class. So credit to Isabella and Tony for their tenacity. Their mother's out of work, and their father brings in what income he can by washing dishes. The family has cut back on everything. So these students, like so many others in their community, cobble together whatever connectivity they can for schoolwork. They may not know it, but standing on that cracked sidewalk in the South Texas heat, they are on the front lines of a new digital divide. And this divide did not exist when I was growing up. All I needed for homework was a pencil, a paper, and my brother leaving me alone. But gone are the days. Today, as many as 7 in 10 teachers assign homework that requires access to broadband. But data here at this commission show that as many as 1 in 3 households do not subscribe to broadband service, citing lack of affordability and lack of interest. Think about those numbers. Where they overlap is what I call the homework gap, and according to the Pew Research Center, the homework gap is real. 5 million households out of the 29 million with school-aged children nationwide are falling into this gap. And these households falling into the homework gap are everywhere, all across the country. The homework gap exists in McAllen, Texas, where Isabella and Tony and so many other students have to stake out space on the sidewalk just to do their schoolwork. The homework gap exists in Detroit, Michigan, where 7 in 10 students have no way to get online at home, and where students forego eating lunch in order to borrow laptops and rush through their nightly homework at school, the only place they have internet access. The homework gap exists in Charlotte, North Carolina, where 1 in 5 students have no broadband access at home and where teachers are wrestling with a curriculum that effectively punishes students without online resources. And the homework gap exists in Fairfax, Virginia, right over the river from where we sit in Washington, D.C., where even in a relatively affluent suburb, nearly 1 in 10 students do not have internet service at home. So across the country, the math might be different, but the homework gap stories are the same. There was a time when broadband access was a luxury. No more. And nothing demonstrates this as clearly as with education. The good news is that we have identified this problem, the homework gap, and we have given it a name. And because of this, the homework gap is finally getting the attention it deserves. Last month, Isabella and Tony from McAllen, Texas, were the subject of a front-page story on the homework gap in the New York Times. It's a story that President Obama shared with millions of his followers on Twitter and on Facebook. The other good news is that today's decision includes steps designed to help close the homework gap. By incorporating broadband into the Lifeline program, we open the doors of digital opportunity. This simple change can help bring more broadband to low-income households with school-aged children. But significantly, we do not stop here. Our decision also modernizes Lifeline by making sure that the devices used for Lifeline broadband services are able to access Wi-Fi signals and that these devices can be turned into Wi-Fi hotspots. For a student with a computer but no way to connect at home, a hotspot can be the difference between keeping up in class and falling behind. It can be the difference between being a digital consumer and becoming a digital creator. It can help put more students on the pathway to science, technology, engineering, and math, a road that suffers today from an unacceptable lack of diversity. So it may seem small, but giving more students the tools to do digital age homework can yield big results. Finally, today's decision encourages providers to help make eligible families with school-aged children aware of the Lifeline program. This is good and important. But to be clear, addressing the homework gap will require more than the Lifeline program. It will require public and private partnerships to help get high-speed services in low-income homes. It will require smarter policies with unlicensed spectrum, because Wi-Fi democratizes internet access, and putting more Wi-Fi in more places can provide more students with more opportunity to get their homework done. And if you want to see how true that is, visit Coachella Valley, California, where 2 weeks ago I saw an innovative Wi-Fi system on school buses that turns ride time into connected time for homework. So in closing, I think we have made progress today by modernizing the Lifeline program. But we still have work to do to ensure that every student, no matter who they are or where they live, has access to the digital tools they need to have a fair shot in the 21st century. Because the homework gap is the cruelest part of our new digital divide, but it is within our power to bridge it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for the way you have kept us focused on the homework gap and the ability of Wi-Fi hotspots to attack that. Commissioner Pai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday, my office finalized a bipartisan compromise with Commissioner Clyburn and Commissioner O'Reilly on a way to modernize the Lifeline program while staying faithful to our core principles. It was not an easy agreement to reach. I'd offered my proposal to all 5 commissioners last week. It was pretty simple, and you may know that since, unlike the commission, I made my proposal public. It had a few basic components. It would have put the Lifeline program on a $1.75 billion budget. It would have included fiscally responsible measures to ensure that we stuck with that budget. It would have ended wasteful enhanced subsidies and redirected that money to low-income Americans in need. And it would have ensured that Lifeline recipients would get 25 megabits per second fixed broadband service and 4G LTE service where available. After all, as we were lectured on this dais just a few months ago, Those were table stakes in the 21st century, and anything short of that shortchanges our children, our future, and our digital economy. I offered that proposal, as I said, last week. Our three offices began working on a compromise yesterday morning. My staff worked with theirs through the night and well into this morning, revising the order in order to implement that bipartisan majority agreement. At 9:49 a.m., all three offices formally agreed to a document that, to quote the official chain, memorializes the exact contours of the compromise. And just think about what that signifies at this agency at this time. In this political environment, on this politically charged of an issue, we had a bipartisan path to a 5-0 vote on Lifeline reform. At 10:30 this morning, when this meeting was scheduled to start, that agreement remained in place. At 12 p.m., when Commissioner O'Reilly and I came down for the meeting and were ready to vote, that agreement remained in place, and my favorable statement was ready to be delivered. Now, Commissioner Clyburn has backed out of that agreement. Why? It turns out that since early this morning, perhaps even late last night, the chairman and his staff have been actively working to undermine and unwind that bipartisan compromise. Those efforts started with leaking non-public information to the press. The chairman's office then encouraged lawmakers and stakeholders, from the usual gaggle of left-wing special interests in Washington to even former FCC commissioners, to blast the deal before the votes could be cast. Indeed, before they even knew what the deal was. It is one thing to refuse to work toward bipartisan compromise, something that for some reason FCC leadership wears the badge of honor that distinguishes it from every other chair, Republican and Democrat, who has ever held that seat. It is quite another to launch a political campaign to force a Democratic FCC commissioner to renege on a bipartisan compromise on her signature issue. Unlike some on this dais, I've spent the vast majority of my career in public service. I've been a staffer on the Senate Judiciary Committee, working on controversial issues like immigration with senators like Barack Obama and Ted Kennedy. I've been a staffer at the Justice Department, working on controversial issues like reauthorization of the Patriot Act with Democrats like Dianne Feinstein. I have worked as a staffer and obviously now as a commissioner here at the FCC with Democrats on many controversial issues. The common thread of my work for many years has been common ground. I believe it exists, and with just a little bit of work and will, we can find it. And so it gives me no pleasure to state the obvious this afternoon. This agency, in this proceeding, represented the worst of government. This was a strong bipartisan agreement that would have delivered digital opportunity to millions of Americans, including the struggling students I met just last week in my hometown when, on my own dime, not on the FCC's travel budget, I went home and spoke to the 7th and 8th grade classes at the elementary school where I grew up. And I got to hear how students whose parents are struggling with meth addiction, with job losses, with healthcare problems, and others simply don't have internet access at all and certainly or can't afford it. Those are the millions of Americans who we denied digital opportunity with the failure to reach a bipartisan vote. And for what? A bipartisan agreement is thrown away and even a Democratic commissioner is bulldozed simply because the chairman's office can get away with it. I'll have a longer written statement that will outline the numerous legal and substantive flaws in today's order, flaws that I hope Congress, the courts, and the American public scrutinize in great detail in the time to come. But suffice it to say for now that the Commission's failure to clean up the waste, fraud, and abuse in this program puts the entire enterprise in jeopardy. It will take a future agency, one whose members work in good faith and believe in good policy, to decide what comes next. I dissent.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Wow. After everything that's taken place in the last 24 hours and about 1,000 of draft statements from every possible angle you can imagine, it seems this item has done a complete 360. It's like some premature, cruel April Fool's Day joke. You can read all about my thoughts in greater detail in my written statement, but for now, 2 thoughts. First, after months of asking the majority to discuss the budget for Lifeline, let it be known that late yesterday they came to me with an offer, one that was tough for me to accept, but ultimately seemed balanced. The balance are different concerns. For all the many process flaws that led us to where we were at that point, I approached the table in good faith with the belief that I could trust the word of a commissioner. Now it seems that even that basic foundation has gone out the windows of the 8th floor. What has happened will do irreparable harm to our ability to engage going forward. Second, I would hope that absolutely no one in this room walks away with the idea or repeats the falsehood that this order includes a budget. To make this simple point understood, I prepared 2 simple slides. If you could bring up number 1. Here we have a fair representation of what any reasonable person is talking about when they talk about the word budget. A number is set, and once spending approaches this level, you have 2 options. Either act affirmatively to raise the budget, or act affirmatively to control the spending and keep it within a set budget. This is the plain and normal meaning of the word. And this was my number 1 goal for any potential Lifeline reform, because Lifeline is the only universal service program that does not operate this way, as my colleague confirmed. And what I found out was that the majority also understands this concept, because that was what we agreed to last night and this morning. So bring up slide 2, if you would. Here we see what the fact sheet for this item refers to as a budget mechanism, and it's been erroneously reported ever as a budget. You see here the critical addition of the big yellow box that transforms a budget into a not a budget. Of course, when spending approaches the magic number thrown in the air today, the Commission could choose to treat it as an actual budget and use one of the options already discussed. As Commission staff admitted earlier this week, the very soonest any affirmative Commission action could happen is 2019. But critically, the yellow box on the top right offers a third option. If the Commission does absolutely nothing, spending blows right through the magic number and continues indefinitely. What does that make the magic number? A joke, not a budget. The majority can and will misrepresent, cut corners, and welch on deals. But please, can the rest of us at least agree to describe what the Commission has done in honest language? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is an important action that we take today. It's a concept that started with the Reagan administration and was updated in the second Bush administration. It's a simple concept to provide assistance so that low-income Americans can access the dominant communications network of the day. In the Reagan administration, that was a telephone network. In the Bush administration, that was the cell phone network. And today, that's broadband. So the first thing this order does is to allow the monthly support that the Bush-era FCC extended to cell phones to now be applied to broadband, whether wired or wireless, under the same kind of conditions that were scoped out at that point in time. And to be clear, this isn't the phasing out of voice service. This is the phasing in of broadband. Another thing this order does is to institute good management practices that were not put in place when the program was adjusted to encompass cell phones. That expansion, for instance, did not include establishing a database to see if consumers were double dipping. Chairpersons Janikowski and Clyburn instituted such a common sense approach, and it paid off by reducing payments by over $1 billion by weeding out those who gamed the system. But I talked about management issues at the same point in time that this program was extended to cell phones in the Bush administration. The fox was allowed to guard the henhouse. That those who profited from the program's payments were made responsible for checking the eligibility of participants, a management tool that requires somewhat of a suspension of disbelief. That today we stop. The fox is no longer guarding the henhouse. Instead, we're putting in place a national verifier. And what that verifier does is to determine, through an independent entity, an individual's eligibility by checking against previously verified government databases. Management against waste, fraud, and abuse that so many have enjoyed hanging around the neck of this program has been implemented starting today. Today's order also brings fiscal integrity to a program that has never had a budget. Never before, whether under Democrat or Republican leadership, has the FCC ever proposed a budget and a mechanism for reviewing that budget. Never before. And finally, today's order expands the choices available to participants. Broadband companies that have never before been eligible can now participate, broadening consumer choice. And the any color so long as it's black mentality that has typified Lifeline for so long is gone. We expect consumers will not only have choices in producers, but will have choices in equipment and choices for various levels of offerings at various prices. There's no doubt, as you have heard here today, that the internet has delivered digital dividends. People who search for and apply for a job online get hired faster. Students who study online have better horizons. Veterans coordinate the receipt of the benefits that they fought for, and they do that online. But there remains a digital divide that keeps a significant number of Americans from participating in these benefits. And today, we take an important step to deliver on digital dividends across the digital divide. And let me just add one other thing. Let me pause to reflect on the deliberative process that led to this decision. I want to praise the efforts of Commissioner Clyburn and Commissioner Pye and Commissioner O'Reilly, including their work late into the night and early this morning, to find consensus. These are important issues, and these are issues that are worthy of agonizing over. Sometimes, however, the deliberative process doesn't lead consensus in the end. But that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. Commissioner Clyburn, there is no greater champion for Lifeline than you. We take our lead from you and your strong advocacy in behalf of too many people who often find themselves voiceless. Thanks for your leadership. Thanks for your efforts to exhaust all avenues and to guide us to a conclusion. And to this team that worked so hard to put this together, thank you very much. So I will now call for the vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. The request for editorial privileges is granted with the objection noted, and the item is adopted. Now, we got any announcements? Commissioner Clyburn?
Yes, thank you very much. So If you were to look at my section of the table, you might notice a couple of faces that may look familiar to some, but are different when it comes to our office. So I want to affirm one of the worst kept secrets in D.C. leading up to the appointment of my new chief of staff, David Grossman, who is my media policy advisor. He spent nearly 7 years, most of you know, on Capitol Hill, most recently as a legislative director and senior advisor for technology policy for Congresswoman Anna Eshoo. And earlier in his career, he worked at the Consumer Technology Association, then known as CEA, and he began his career as an analyst with Kellogg Clyburn. Sitting next to him is Mignon, who is joining my team as a legal advisor for wireless international and public safety issues. Darlene should look familiar to you because she was the chief of staff in the Enforcement Bureau. And as the assistant chief in previous to that, assistant chief in the Spectrum Enforcement Division, before she came to the commission, Mr. Chairman, was an associate at Skadden Arps. This means that I will say farewell officially to two individuals, Louis Peretz, who spent 6 years of outstanding service as my senior advisor, but working on the portfolio that Darlene is taking up. He played a key role in helping me achieve many of my policy priorities in the wireless, public safety, and international areas. He is the most loyal person I know, full of integrity, terrific counsel. He is invaluable, and he will be missed, and of course we wish him the best. And I want to lastly thank our very own, I call her the media bionic woman, Holly Sarah. Her first and last words to me were always, "Whatever you need, Commissioner." And her first and last acts of service consistently lived up to that phrase. I will never be able to thank her enough for her contributions to my office, and of course this commission, but I will simply affirm what everybody already knows. Holly, you are awesome, and I am grateful.
Commissioner Rosenworcel? Fine. O'Reilly? Well, I just want to say farewell to our three spring law clerks. There is one here hiding in the back, Anthony Jones. But Anthony and Gabrielle Whitehall and Camille Cadre have been with us during this period. Anthony's heading back to Catholic University, to the Columbus School of Law, where he'll finish his second year. And he has just been elected the production editor for the Law and Tech Journal, formerly known as the Communications Journal. And I understand that he's got a summer internship lined up with NBCU. So this is a great future ahead for Anthony. Gabrielle, or Gabby as we called her, is not here right now. She's in class because she wants to finish her second year. She's at Georgetown, and she's going to be a summer intern at Sydney and Austin. Jamil is also studying at class today at Georgetown. She'll be graduating in May, and is it appropriate to say looking forward to taking the bar exam this summer? And she's coming back because she's been accepted to the honors program here at the FCC. So we'll soon be saying welcome to Jamil. We're really lucky to have this group with us. Anthony, you're responsible for conveying these best wishes to everybody, but thank you to you and all of your colleagues. Madam Secretary, walk us through what happens next.
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Thursday, April 28th, 2016.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. The meeting is adjourned.
Yes, they probably could, yes. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started with the press conference. Those of you who have questions, if you want to come up to the front table here, I will turn it over to Chairman Wheeler and Commissioner Clyburn.
So as we did when Commissioner Clyburn led us through the inmate calling service item, what we want to do here is give you a chance to ask Commissioner Clyburn any questions about the Lifeline order, and then we'll shut down Lifeline, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about anything else that you want to talk about. So, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those of you who know me, you know I don't miss this part of it. But I want to say today how proud I am to be a member of the SEC. Just a few minutes ago, we followed through on a promise and commitment that for years I have been passionate about. This was difficult. This is a program that has been under increased, a lot of scrutiny, a lot of criticism for a long period of time. But it was important for us, I believe, to look at what the program does and why it was developed. Millions of Americans are stuck on the wrong side of the opportunities in the communications divide. And it's important for us, and we do it well in the other portfolios, to look at what our health care portfolio looks like in terms of the FCC's footprint, to look at what infrastructure looks like when it comes to the FCC's footprint, to look at what schools and libraries look like and what our role is, as a federal agency. But there's one place where I think we fell incredibly behind when it comes to addressing the needs of those who are disconnected. There are millions who cannot afford basic service. There are millions who are in need of advanced services. Today, we acknowledge that we affirm our commitment to close those gaps, and we give them the one thing that they did not have before today's order was voted on, and that's choice. So I'm proud to say that there's more choice, there are opportunities, there's a program that will meet the 21st century needs of those who are most worthy and could most benefit from connectivity and what the technological revolution has to offer. So just wanted to say that up front, and if you have any questions of me, I'll be glad to address them. Yes, ma'am.
Stanton T.R. Daly. Could you just walk us through your thought process? Well, first of all, could you confirm whether you had at some point did have an agreement with Commissioners O'Reilly and Pai?
I will say that we started conversations on yesterday. Because oftentimes I have found that there are only 1, 2, or 3 things that separate us from closure and consensus. And I took a risk that was true, that there were only a couple of things that were keeping us away from a 5-0. And I took a chance. It was a very very difficult thing for me to do, but I took a chance on us being that close. At the end of the day, after many hours of back and forth, I can jokingly say that I don't carry a pedometer, but I know I got in every step that was required of anybody on any day walk on the 8th floor between last night and today. And we did the very best that we could to come to agreement. We were very, very, very close, but at the end of the day, we could not strike that balance. And the effort is all worth it. I'll make up for sleep, but the deliberative process, whether you come to agreement or not, it worked today. It worked today. It doesn't guarantee a consensus or an outcome in which we all agree. But the process in and of itself, which I continue to say is the envy of the world, it worked today, even if we couldn't get to 5-0.
Sure.
I don't know which order.
Alex Byers with Politico. Just to be really clear, to follow up on Lynn's question.
Okay.
the contention from the Republicans is that their offices and your office had an agreement on this morning, and then you changed your mind. Is that true?
Well, I will
true?
say that when I left today, I, like most people, when you have something or when you're reaching consensus, there are some things that you're not necessarily the most comfortable with. I had the opportunity to get about 2.5 hours sleep. I had the opportunity to look at some of the interactions and postings of today. And when I looked at it in total, I did go back to my colleagues and say, can we give it one more shot if we could tweak this? And neither party was able to move any further. And that's why we're standing here today, unable to reach consensus. Yes.
Kyle Daly, Bloomberg BNA. Can you just give us a little more color on the specifics of those factors that you just couldn't reach consensus on? Was it purely the budget?
Well, one of the things that I might make clear, you've heard even before today, is the word cap always gave me heartburn. I looked at this program, especially with the current the budget that was released, and said that even with that, even though it might be higher than what we see today, it still would not meet the needs of those potential 39 million households who are eligible. I never was embracing a concept or an order that would foreclose opportunities. And when I looked at it in total and what it could potentially mean, at the end of the day, I was not certain that I was not the affirmative vote would not foreclose opportunities, and that upon reflection, which is what we do often, is what brought us here today. Yes.
Yeah, Dave Shepardson from Reuters. There was a contention from the Republicans that you were bullied or that people on Capitol Hill were trying to sway you. Can you first address whether you think you were bullied by the chairman or anybody else?
So go ahead. And you had another
and just
part
whether what was the role of people on Capitol Hill and advocates in your decision?
So I know I'm just 5'2.5", but I'm not easily bullied. And so anybody who knows me, including the people who raised me, and a few people in these offices will say to you that bullied, I don't respond well to that. And in fact, if I were, I would go probably more likely to go in the opposite direction. Look, these are difficult decisions in which we face. The Lifeline program has a whole host of complexities. If it were not, we would have reformed it, 20 plus years ago. And so I am, as you could tell by my statements, wedded, passionate, and committed to the viability of this program. I want it to be one in which people are not ashamed to sign up for. I want it to be one that more providers find it attractive enough to serve deserving individuals. I want to remove all of the negative stigmas, all of the vulnerabilities. And I looked at that in total and said, on my own, when I woke up this morning, and speaking with the advisors who are in my office, is this the best path forward? And I concluded under the current construct that it was not. I'll do this and I'll come back. Thanks.
Margaret McGill with Politico. I just want to follow up on that. So did you hear from lawmakers at all today, or were they in touch with your office at all?
I will say that there was some, interaction from a number of parties, so I won't say whether or not. I heard from a wide range of individuals. I will say from a number of spectra, and all of those factors. I considered and I weighed as I moved on this. I will say to you that I cannot say that any 1, 2, or 3 things swayed, me. I will say to you that some of the reservations that I had last night, that I had this morning, have not changed or have not moved, and that's a part of compromise. You've got some things that that you don't 100% agree with, and you make the best of decisions you can. And sometimes when you look at things in totality, you might realize that you might need to take another step, see if you can come up with a compromise, and if not, make a decision.
Did the chairman pressure you to pull out of this compromise? And what was going on? If you made your decision early this morning, what was the reason for the delay? What was going on for those 3.5 hours?
Well, I can say that the chairman did not pressure me. He has always said to me that this is an item that I know you are committed to, and I will follow your lead. He has always, said that to me. And what was the last part of your question? I'm sorry. One of us failed to eat today, so I'm more
sure.
a little bit. And it is in the afternoon. Don't tell my mom I haven't eaten all day. But
if you had come to the conclusion early this morning after getting some sleep, I'm wondering the delay. What was going on during that delay?
I have an impressive and incredible staff who they both inform and challenge. And that's why you hire staff. So I hire staff that would just simply rubber stamp or codify what I do, who I am, and what I think. They will challenge me, inform me, and advise me. And all of those variables went into play as you heard in my statement today. Yes. Thank you. I look at the climate in total. I am, by very nature, a person who is very comfortable and prefers consensus. I did it when, in terms of when I was acting chair, and when I was at the South Carolina Public Commission as a chair. There was one point in time somebody might argue, but I'll say it gently, I was the only identified Democrat. I'll put it that way. And so you have to compromise and come to consensus when you're one of 7. And so this is not inorganic for me. Compromise and trying to build consensus is very natural for me. I come from a state, where the political climate is dynamic. So again, it is in my DNA, and I'm always going to start from a posture of attempting to reach consensus. When it does not work, or when it crosses a line that I think will compromise a position, or compromise a docket, or compromise a goal, that's when I will make a shift. But I'm always going to start from that posture of attempting to get as close to 5-0 as possible if I can influence it. Yes, sir.
I think this decision ultimately lies with the chairman, and I'll ask him as well. But Republicans were asking to have the chain or the document. Republicans were asking to have the chain or the document released that had all these agreements on it. Do you have any problem releasing that?
Well, as a professional who thinks that's an internal work product, I do. As a person who I will say has been on the other side of the release of things, yes, I do. I think if that is, a practice. I mean, you can FOIA. I'm not going to say anything against you in terms of FOIA, but I think one of the things that will benefit the internal deliberative process is to know that you can express yourself and have conversations that are free flowing. Whatever is supposed to be released will be released. But I consider that an internal working a document, and we can. The media advisors will help me in determining whether or not that's subject for release. But I personally would not ever consider doing that with exchanges with my colleagues. I would never promote doing that, personally.
Hi, Brian Fung from the Washington Post. Commissioner, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your interactions with the chairman while this was, the events of last night were sort of playing out. Did at any point did he express to you concerns about the plan that you and the Republican commissioners had come up with, at any point either last night or this morning?
So I will answer that as it relates to, because a lot of the exchanges and most 95% of it was staff driven. So I can say to you that there was transparency between officers. The chairman's office knew about our conversations and at different steps away. So there were no backroom secret, one office versus the other type of negotiation. Was always open and transparent. And I speak to the chairman on a regular basis, regardless of what the docket item is. So we continue those lines of communications are always open.
So at no point did he say that he would have trouble supporting the Republican position?
I will say to you what he has said to me. I think I counted 5 times. This is your item. I know how much it means to you. I will follow your lead. Thank you. Oh. I don't. Yeah, I'll give to. Well, I don't know how you. The old regime only did one per person, but I'll let you go because I like you today.
Thank you. A slightly different, more specific issue. That you had said that you were open to alternatives.
Yes.
And there was a lot of pushback, even from public interest groups, on this issue of standalone voice service being phased out. Are you comfortable with where the commission has ended up on that?
So I'm looking at I'm looking at the evolution of these industries, and I'm a little more comfortable. And I will say that was one of the questions I made it very clear during the hearing, that I want all options on the table. I wanted all options on the table. I am advised that the way things are migrated in offerings in a number of current packages, that combo approach, meaning a voice and data complement, it may or may not be as robust as we like, that already exists, that's not unnatural, and that is the trend in which the industry is going. So one of the things that I always say about this process, it is not closed. If there are things that we don't get 100% right, even after we vote on an order published and in place, if there were any types of misreads or in what we projected, we have an opportunity, and the public has an opportunity, and companies have an opportunity to weigh in and say, you did not get that quite right, and we have the opportunity to reconsider. They have an opportunity to seek a waiver standard. So the good thing, again, I keep saying this, and I really mean this, about the FCC's process is one that is open, it is interactive, and it's available for course corrections if we fail to get it 100% right.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. I'll let the person who is usually here.
No, I'll tell you what. If there are other Lifeline questions, because somebody said they wanted to ask me, but I just want to make sure that because this is, as she said, I've looked to Commissioner Clyburn for leadership on this.
Are there other
so
Lifeline questions?
If there are Lifeline questions for me, otherwise we can go on to all the other
Marlene,
any other
do you have
topics.
A question for the chairman on Lifeline?
I would put the same question about releasing the chain. Republicans seem to insinuate that it was ultimately your decision.
I think that's a deliberative document that traditionally hasn't been released, although I do understand that it's been shown around.
Any other questions on the
Okay.
Lifeline item?
He's in.
Oh, sorry.
Can you also address the Republican charge that you bullied the commissioner?
Balderdash.
I don't know how to spell that.
Todd.
Here's a question on Lifeline. Could you enlighten us on the budget, no budget, cap, no cap? What's going on with that part of the Lifeline?
I'm not sure I understand what that.
Commissioner Clyburn said there's no cap on the program. The Republican commissioner said there's no budget. You said there is a budget mechanism.
Right.
How are we to make sense of these
So the budget.
statements?
For the first time, we have said, here is the number, and the question then becomes, okay, now what do you do when you get to that? What we have to do when we're planning, we've got a multi-year process here. You got to set up something that runs for multiple years. So nowhere, we haven't gotten to the E-rate budget that we put in at that back in that proceeding. So we're not going to get to this for a while. So the question becomes, if ever, okay, what kind of mechanism do you put in if you do get up where you're bumping it? So we say, okay, when you get 90%, that's a trigger for then revisiting this number and this question. So that's what we put in.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I'll follow if I could. If we go to $2.25 billion, what happens with the contribution factor? Have you all penciled that out?
Well, the contribution factor has actually been going down of late.
So is it possible that in a given year you would spend more than $2.25 million on Lifeline?
Is it possible? In a coming year, or are you talking 15 years?
It sounds like it's not a hard cap, that the spending could go over that.
There's an inflation adjustment to it as well. So, but the answer is there is a mechanism for the commission to make that decision. That's what's important, okay? That there is a mechanism where whoever the commission is at that point in time, they get to make that decision.
This is on Lifeline too. On Commissioner Pai's statement that your office was encouraging lawmakers, special interest groups to pressure Commissioner Clyburn, can you address that? Was that what your office was doing today?
Balderdash.
Okay.
Dave.
On the cap, what would you have been able to support a $2 billion hard cap, and what would that have done in terms of?
Now we're all into hypotheticals and all this sort of stuff. There is a product that has been produced by a majority of the commission working together in a very deliberative manner, and that's what's key, not hypotheticals. I mean, should have been printed on blue paper. I don't know.
Aside from what may or may not have happened today, I mean, you guys put out your fact sheet 3 weeks ago on this, and now I'm sure we'll get to look through the actual order itself once it comes out. I'm sort of confused if there were any changes from what you guys were thinking about 3 weeks ago and what was in the fact sheet to now. Is what happened today just exactly what we were thinking about 3 weeks ago, or were there other tweaks?
There are
or any major tweaks, we might say.
There are a bunch of tweaks along the way.
What should we know?
Components of the national verifier database, the Wi-Fi tethering that Commissioner Rosenworcel was talking about. Yes, I mean this has been a dynamic process, that's been going on for months. Okay, great.
Sorry, one more,
Monty.
Com Daily. How should an FCC chairman treat a 3-2 compromise that he's not part of? Do you have a responsibility to put that on the agenda?
How should? I mean, again, you're into hypotheticals. That wasn't the reality.
Philosophy of being the chairman. I was thinking I could get around the hypothetical that way.
When I hang up my stirrups here, then I'll be a philosopher.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Again, thank you for all of your leadership on this. What are the things? Okay. Pick a topic, any topic. So, should we go down? Should we start?
Let's start over here, Jim.
Okay, Jim.
Questions for the chairman?
Beyond Lifeline?
Yes.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
All right, Margaret.
Anything on the incentive auction? The initial bid commitments came in?
Big stuff. Good stuff. A lot of things happening.
Spectrum extravaganza still, or?
Yes. I'll stick with extravaganza.
We recently learned that Netflix is throttling its video streams to wireless customers, and it blamed data caps for its policy. Do things like that encourage you to look at data caps more closely?
Oh, as I think we have been looking at zero rating data caps in all kinds of a big context, and so I don't know whether it means more closely. It's not a new topic to us, that's for damn sure.
Glenn, more on data caps. You had mentioned the inquiries back in December, and then that they were delayed because of the snow days of the meetings. So where is that whole process? Is it concluded?
They're underway.
just underway.
It's underway.
No further
They're underway.
update on where we are.
They're underway.
Okay.
Chairman, just to clarify about Netflix, does the FCC have the authority to investigate the alleged throttling by Netflix, or is that something that you would see outside of the FCC's jurisdiction?
I am in violent agreement with Commissioner O'Reilly that this is outside of open internet. David.
So just to follow up, not to belabor it, so you don't believe that Netflix's behavior violates any FCC regulations?
It's outside of open internet. We do not regulate edge providers.
Alicia Green, CQ Roll Call. You clarified your comments on rate regulation for a bill that's going through the House right now, HR 2666. Have you seen the amendment that was put forward by Chairman Wallen specifying his definition of rates, and are you comfortable with that definition as this bill looks poised to go through the House soon?
The latest amendment that I saw from Mr. Walden, I think I said in the hearing, reinforces my belief, because as I recall what it did was it said that paid prioritization would be outside of this, that you could consider rates for paid prioritization. So if you're saying, well, okay, you can consider it here after all, it means that everything else, such as the impact of rates on throttling, such as the impact of rates on blocking, such as the impact of rates on other activities, would still be encouraged. And the point that I was making in the testimony is that we said we would forbear from using rate-making authority, not that we were flushing rate-making authority.
Kyle Bailey, Bloomberg BNA. Just had a question about the privacy NPRM. So you kind of hit on the point, this consumer data. There's been an argument that, well, whether you're talking about IP addresses that are assigned to the consumer or under judicial precedent, information that consumers are giving to providers in exchange for service, that technically this doesn't actually belong to the consumers anymore. Are you concerned that could be an overhang in terms of, a court challenge or actually getting these NPRM to like an actual final?
I'm sure that that'll be fleshed out in the comments. I think the point goes back to, you don't own your telephone number either, yet the calls that you make from that telephone number are your privileged information. Alex.
I had like 5 Netflix questions, and they've all been asked, but I'm going to come up with number 6. You're right that the FCC doesn't regulate the edge, but
I don't like House of Cards, the new House of Cards season, as much as the earlier ones. There's a Netflix question. You don't either? Yeah, okay, good. Okay, that's your one question. I'm sorry, Alex. Okay.
No, at the same time, the company still has a lot of business before the FCC. Obviously, with the open internet order, you guys are taking a look, at least under the general conduct standard, with interconnection. And I guess my question is, they've billed it as sort of a consumer protection component. You've talked about in the past Mignon as being like pro-consumer, highly innovative. It's in the same vein there. What's your take?
3 parts. Pro-consumer, highly innovative, and we're going to keep our eye on it.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Everybody seems to overlook that last.
Okay, that's fair. Is what Netflix is doing pro-consumer as well?
It is outside of our jurisdiction.
But it's not, right? Like you have.
As I said, it is not an open internet issue what they're doing. Okay. So
That's
I'm going to leave it at that.
Questions over here?
All right. After you testified in the Senate last month, earlier this month, Senator Thune said it would, quote, be helpful for Commissioner Rosenworcel's nomination or renomination if you made a commitment to leave at the end of Obama's term if a Republican was elected. Why not make that commitment if it would help a fellow commissioner get renominated? And can you give me at least one scenario in which you wouldn't leave, which is, preventing you from making this
I
ironclad
think
commitment?
this is all suppositional and hypothetical. I gave my answer to Senator Thune. Senator Nelson laid out how Senator Reid and the Democratic leadership of the Senate believe that they have a deal with Senator McConnell and the Republican leadership to approve or at least consider Commissioner Rosenworcel. End of discussion.
Hi, Amir Nasser, Morning Consult. That just reminded me, actually. The Senate Commerce Committee has a bill that they haven't marked up or anything, but that is being discussed, which is the FCC reauthorization bill. And I was wondering, there are a couple very minor reforms in that bill, but I was wondering if you had any comments or thoughts on the whole reauthorization
Not at this
process.
point.
Thank you.
Is the FCC going to settle with Latino broadcasters?
I think the question is the Latina is free to pursue their own relationship with us. We're now they're in the auction as a result of the court decision, and free to determine whatever they want to do insofar as pursuing their remedies in the court.
Any other questions over here?
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Because of the late start today, we're changing our normal order. The commissioners will have to go first today because they have a commitment, and then the bureaus will follow the commissioners.
I'll say it's my fault why we're shaking up the order. I have a commitment. I have to get my daughter from daycare. So,
questions?
Lynn Stanton, TR Daily. Commissioner Pye, you had said in your statement that that you're denying, I think you used the word opportunity, but in the Lifeline statement, to millions of Americans with the order adopted today. And I'm a little confused. I'm just a little confused as to what you mean by that, or what that could mean. Because there is going to be Lifeline support at a higher rate than you were suggesting, isn't there?
Well, for one thing, they rejected the minimum standards proposal I put on the table. So some members of this panel preened back a couple of months ago that broadband in the 21st century, table stakes in the 21st century was 25 megabits per second. I read also another of my colleagues' statements that anything less than that is shortchanging our future, shortchanging our children, shortchanging the digital economy. If that is true, then I don't think it's too much of a leap to suggest, as my compromise proposal did, and as was agreed to on paper by two other commissioners' offices, that we should allow, where available, Lifeline recipients to have that minimum standard of service. And that's what I mean in terms of delivering digital opportunity. We see a lot of commissioners talking all the time about how it's important to bridge this digital divide, how everyone should have equal opportunity. That is what I'm talking about. If a service that meets the FCC's definition of broadband is available, it seems to me that it's not just enough to make high flowery statements here at FCC headquarters. It's important to put it into practice in the field to impact the people, especially low-income Americans who are denied that equal opportunity to get to benefit from the broadband revolution. That's what I had in mind when I said that.
Your statement earlier in the week about the compromise that you were proposing, you indicated that $1.75 billion would be enough to, if I understood you correctly, to be saying enough for everybody who was eligible.
Correct.
For the service. Right now it's at 1.5, and officials have said that that's only funding a third of the people who would be eligible. Can you walk me through your math or your assumptions or your definitions?
Sure. So for a couple things. First of all, the current program is around $1.53 billion. Right now, the median income, as I understand it, for households that are eligible for Lifeline and who receive Lifeline is something like $38,000. In other words, well above the poverty level. What we've also found is that a great number of Americans who who could participate in the program simply don't. Additionally, obviously, the current program doesn't focus on broadband. So what I asked my staff to do is to say, look, let us figure out the number that would allow us to cover every Lifeline eligible household that might wish to participate in the program if it were extended to broadband. And the number we came to was below $1.75 billion, but as a show of good faith, what I said was, look, let's make it $1.75 billion because that is $200-some million greater than the current program. It allows some flexibility in order to ensure that all Americans have the ability to participate in the program for broadband, and it meets the chairman's commitment of preserving voice service for some of those who still rely on it. And so it seemed to me that was it didn't seem to me that was a particularly controversial way of attacking the problem.
Next question.
Did Chairman Wheeler actively work to undermine this deal either last night or this morning during the delay?
Yes.
And
do you want me to elaborate?
Yes, yes. What? Because he says.
I'll just give you one example. I was sitting in Commissioner Clyburn's office this morning talking to her about the nuances of this compromise, which we had on. And speaking of which, okay, first let me back up. There's been a lot of what the young people called FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, suggested about what exactly was going on in this deliberative process. The deliberative process had concluded, and let me just give you the exact evidence of that. 9:29 a.m., my staff circulated on the official chain, in line with our prior compromise proposal, the PI office requests the following edits. Number 1, establish a budget of $2 billion. Number 2, establish a self-effectuating budget mechanism on a half-year basis. Number 3, target enhanced support to tribal lands located in counties with fewer than 50 people per square mile. Number 4, phase in minimum standards of 25.3 for fixed broadband and 4G LTE for more mobile broadband. In case that wasn't clear enough, we also said in that very same email, the attached red line, my staff went through the item, made the conforming changes that reflected the compromise that all three offices had hammered out. The attached red line memorializes the exact contour of these edits required for these proposals in both the order language and the rules. We request assistance from staff to revise the front matter accordingly. 9:37 a.m., with the Commissioner's indulgence, Commissioner O'Reilly's office signed on to those edits. 9:49 a.m., in the spirit of compromise, the Clyburn office also supports the PI office request. That is an agreement at 9:49 a.m. The deal is done. I've been at the FCC a long time, longer than the chairman has, and I can tell you that in my world, when the majority reaches an agreement and you have three people on the chain who say we support this proposal, that is the proposal, unless somebody decides to renege for some reason. Now, the suggestion is, well, the deliberative process played itself out. That is utterly bogus. We had an agreement that was memorialized not just on the chain, but on paper. A bipartisan majority of the FCC had agreed to what the item was. Now, fast forward. The meeting is at 10:30. I'm ready to go. I have my statement ready to go. 12 o'clock, I come back at 11:50. Some of you guys saw me here. Statement was ready to go, very favorable. Yeah, we reformed the Lifeline program, digital opportunity to millions of Americans. Let's hoist the flag and go home. All of a sudden we hear, well, it's going to be postponed until 1:30. So then I had a series of meetings with a number of different offices, but in particular, as it relates to your question, I was sitting in Commissioner Clyburn's office physically as we were trying to say, well, first of all, I was trying to hammer out what was going on, and I was told, well, there's been significant pushback from everybody on Capitol Hill. There's too much pushback. There's been a lot of heat taken because of this compromise. And I said, well, look, we had an agreement. It seemed we didn't get everything we wanted. You haven't gotten everything you wanted. That's the nature of compromise. But look, we have a good deal on the table that would preserve a unified 5-0 vote on Lifeline, one of the most politically charged issues for years to come. Let's save the deal. And almost shortly after that, while I was sitting in the office, I was told, the commissioner's office told her, the chairman is here in the lobby to see you. And it was made clear to me, I won't quote anything, but it was just made very clear to me that this deal is not going to happen. Now, if the deal on paper, as expressed to the 5 offices, actually happened, and if the deal suddenly is struck from the chain, you tell me. I mean, was it just sort of a serendipitous, organic revelation? No, of course not. I mean, everyone's been in Washington long enough to know exactly what happened here. And it was made utterly clear for me, not just from Commissioner Clyburn's office. We were getting press calls all the time. This senator or this congressman is now demanding that the FCC retract this terrible bipartisan compromise. Is it true that Commissioner Clyburn is trying to gut the Lifeline program? If we're getting press calls like that, I can only imagine what her office was getting. And so this notion that there's some deliberative process here that was transparent is utterly ridiculous. This was the deliberative process. What happened afterward was completely non-transparent, had nothing to do with deliberation, and the notion that the chairman's office was taking its lead from Commissioner Clyburn is utterly ridiculous. If that were true, we never would have reached this agreement in the first place. I'm wound up.
I just have a follow-up on that. What does this mean for the deliberative process going forward, and how will this affect the relationship going forward?
Look, I mean, all I can tell you is what I said earlier, that based on my long career in public service on Capitol Hill, in the federal courts, at the Justice Department, and now at the FCC, I've always tried to reach compromise. Wherever it is, whatever the issue is, I always try to make a constructive proposal that even when I'm in the minority will allow everybody to get a little bit of what they want. Now, the significant downside, I will concede, is that having that approach when you're dealing with people who don't operate in good faith really does torpedo your ability to effect significant change. And so where does this go from here? I have no idea. But given the vastness of the process files that have accumulated here, given what has happened on this issue, on E-rate a couple of years ago, I mean, you name it, I have no idea where we go from here. It's pretty clear at this point that 3-2 is the norm, and if it shuts out the minority and makes our orders less politically appealing to Capitol Hill or less able to withstand judicial scrutiny, this agency doesn't care. So I don't know what you do with that.
Maybe I'll answer it before we get there. Many months ago, the chairman and I had a similar breakup on an issue, and I made my views very well known, how I disagreed with the process, and it would influence how I go forward. So now, when I approach, I'm happy to cut deals if that's the case may be, but I always have a supposition that they can't be held. And here, in the past, I've been able to count on a particular word of a commissioner, and I will now have the same supposition that it's not worth what it was worth. I have tried to be honest to my word. And it reminds me of, an old phrase on Capitol Hill. I'm sorry, I always bring back this, there's a couple famous ones, never get involved in a land war in Asia. But the second one that is always never count on a Dem to hold their vote.
Just wondering if you could, either of you, tell us what, if anything, you've heard from the Hill leading up to the vote on this item.
I abided by the Sunshine Act restriction. I didn't have any contact with Capitol Hill over the last week.
Yeah, I haven't either. I don't know that they've been around. I think they've been out of session, so I haven't talked to. In the past, I've talked to them. My views have been well known on the topic of a cap and move to a hard budget. So they've been well known. I testified on those points, so that shouldn't come to surprise.
Why were you able to read to us a second ago that what was in the content of that piece of paper, is that not non-public information? We sort of went around with this at the E&C hearing the other day, and I didn't know if this was a John Shimkus prompted civil disobedience, or if this is not technically against the rules.
No, I'm not going Bulworth. I'll simply say that this abides by the artificial restrictions the chairman suggested last week. That, look, as long as commissioners aren't disclosing what is in the exact item itself, and look, I've got the red line right here that reflects the changes that my staff, Commissioner O'Reilly's staff, and Commissioner Clyburn's staff signed off on. I won't release that. But I will say is that this is not non-public information. It doesn't describe in any sufficient detail the exact terms of what the commission did. Got it. And moreover, I mean, under the well-established case of Goose versus Gander, I mean, if the chairman's office is going to put preemptively its own spin out at every single turn, including to your publication earlier this morning, I don't feel that bad about revealing the exact evidence of the agreement that we had as of 9/49.
So, Dave Shepherdson from Reuters. So, can I go back? So, was the central sticking point, do you think, that Wheeler opposed the cap per se, or do you think this was more about the idea of who is in charge of the commission, for the last 10 months?
Look, you'll have to try to get blood out of that stone to get an answer. I'm not privy to all the machinations within the chairman's office. All I can tell you is what I know based on my personal knowledge in dealing with Commissioner O'Reilly and Commissioner Clyburn on this issue, both on the staff level but even personally. And what I can tell you is that it was made very clear to me that despite the fact that there was a bipartisan majority in support of this agreement, and it was on paper, The only vote that mattered was the one that set the agenda.
Can I answer it this way? When we did the NPRM, I believed, and I said publicly and testified the fact that I had 4 votes for a cap, including the chairman. So I thought I was in a fine place, but I still lost. I thought it was a funny anecdote. This time, the one who was the holdout came to me and said, "Hey, I'm willing to consider X." And I said, "Wow, we went round and round. I talked to my colleague. We, spent the afternoon and we got to a good place. I left, he left. Staff worked all night to get us to a good place. So, I'm having a little trouble now that the chairman was for budget before, and now the idea that he's not, and he says, "Well, I don't want to talk about that. That's water under the bridge. I watched the press conference. I don't want to. That was hypothetical. We now have this new document, and that's irrelevant for our purposes." I mean, come on. Passing the buck here, right? Either for it or you're against it. They were for it at one point, and now even Commissioner Clyburn was working on it yesterday, and we got to agreement, and then all of a sudden it evaporated. So if it's to your second point in terms of who's in control, I don't know. I don't know why that would matter. I really don't. I don't care if all of us vote for it. It wasn't about. I wasn't trying to make a coup to the chairman, a 3-2. I didn't approach this and say, "Hey, would you join us, Commissioner Clyburn? Can we hoodwink you to be the 3 of us?" I didn't do that. They came to me, so I wasn't trying to oversert the chairman's agenda or power.
And if I could just add, I agree with everything Commissioner O'Reilly said. I would just add to that. Our understanding was that at least as of last night, this compromise had been socialized with the chairman's office. I never heard anything about any opposition within it was only this morning when all of a sudden I was told there's this sort of backbench effort to whip up, as I said in my statement, lawmakers, special interest groups, even former FCC commissioners put pressure on the one member who for whom this is a signature issue and who is critical, who's a bipartisan linchpin to this deal being struck. It is what it is.
Anyone else? Well, actually, if I could just quickly change the subject, briefly change the subject, which you're probably welcome. Do both of you agree with the chairman's view that the alleged throttling by Netflix is outside of the FCC's jurisdiction? And if that's the case, which agency, if any, would have purview, or would this be up to Congress to decide whether to investigate?
I gave a speech on such a fact, so you're happy to look at the more particulars I said. One, in terms of the chairman's point, it is outside the purview as currently defined. It depends if you want to whip up a 706 virtuous circle kind of scenario, but I don't believe in the 706, so I do believe that such a thing would be outside the jurisdiction. I said the FTC could look at it. What I said the FCC could look at is whether they provided any misrepresentations in their lobbying or in their presentations regarding the net neutrality item. So I haven't, and I've made very clear that they are not a violation of net neutrality. It does not cover edge providers, and don't believe they have. Now, whether Congress gets involved is another matter for them to decide. I leave it to their capable hands.
I also would agree that it's not a violation of the rules as adopted by the majority last year.
Sorry, this is probably really in the weeds, but just I'm not an expert on the FCC rules. The sunshine rules in particular, if there was contact between outside parties on the Hill or off the Hill with commissioners, I guess within the last week, is that against the rules? Would it have to be disclosed, or what's the regulations there?
Oh, God. I mean, it's been ages since I was in OGC dealing with this stuff. I mean, obviously, a week before, no outside party is supposed to make a presentation to a decision maker on the merits. I mean, I can't think of what communication from Capitol Hill that expresses displeasure with a bipartisan compromise on Lifeline would be, other than a presentation on the merits. So whether there's some sort of legislative exception or the like, I have no idea.
Okay.
I concur. I don't understand when I heard the phrase "some parties," a wide range of individuals weighing in on the matter. I'm dumbfounded. We're in the quiet period, and I don't know how they would be exempt in any form or imagination.
Anyone else? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Hope you get to daycare in time.
Are there questions for the bureaus at this point? First, I think it would be the video description item, if there's questions on that. Okay, Monty. Could you get up to the table? Okay, thank you. Bill?
Hi, Mr. Lake, Monty Taylor, Com Daily. I was just wondering if you had any response to Commissioner Pai's point about the strange math in the no backsliding rule, where he said there's a clause that would allow, that says that there can be more than 5 broadcast networks in the top 5 broadcast networks. Do you have any response to that? Is that true?
Sure. The item uses top 5 as a term of art. It notes that under the current industry structure, it's unlikely that there would be more than 5 because of the 4 named are likely to remain within the top 5. But it acknowledges that as the rules are structured, if one does drop, then there could be more. It could be a 6th network technically in what we call the top 5.
Okay. I guess that's all I have.
Yes, that's basically the result of the no backsliding rule.
Right. Okay. That's all I have.
Okay. Any others on video description? Okay, how about for the privacy item? Okay, Brian, you'll have some questions on that, so Wireline folks will come up. Thanks. Can't do this without Lisa. Right.
Thank you.
Can you just clarify for me one more time, what's the difference between CPI and CPNI? How do you guys handle that?
So the CPNI is a statutorily defined term. There's actually a definition in 222H. And in the item, there are proposals and questions about how you take customer proprietary network information and interpret it in a broadband ISP realm. CPI is a term that is encompassing both CPNI and a general category of personally identifiable information. And that's a fairly well-known term. It has different definitions in different contexts, and we seek comment on that.
And the relationship between the two within the context of the proposal.
Yeah, so there's questions, of course. As Commissioner Rosenworcel noted, many questions, a lot of jumping off points for people to comment on this, but the proposal is to protect both CPNI and PII, which together form CPI. Is that right, Lisa? Okay.
There was a lot of discussion about the various industry practices that you were going to look into, the paying for, the giving away of information in exchange for discounts and whatnot. And then, because of the heat with which those were discussed, I was a little bit unclear. Is there some kind of presumption in the item that these are wrong, or it's just purely, what do you think?
There's no presumption on those. There are questions asked about specific practices along the lines that were mentioned in some of the statements, and whether there should be, for example, heightened notice, heightened choice requirements, or any other particular action that should be taken. But it's an NPRM, and it's something we hope people will discuss.
Thank you.
Anything further on privacy? All right, thank you. And then, Matt, are you staying here?
I'll hang out here.
Okay, right.
Comfortable.
So finally, Lifeline, and Trent is joining us.
And Lynn, thank you for always staying for the Bureau press conference. Right. It's so nice.
Oh, it's the best part of the day.
Yes.
Is somebody down here? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want on the date. So would people who are interested in applying for this subsidy, is December 1st of this year, is that? I'm just trying to tell people when they would be able to apply for this, or when they would be effective.
That would, yeah, go ahead, Trent.
So, yes, in the item we talk about how a lot of the minimum standards, for example, that we're putting in place are going to start kicking in on December 1st. We, of course, need to get OMB approval, but we expect to get that certainly by.
So the eligibility would be, this would begin December 1st? Is that when people could opt for the broadband subsidy as opposed to the phone subsidy?
Right, and there's a fair amount of paperwork that we have to do to make sure that when these rules become effective, but we're targeting December 1st.
Okay, thanks.
Do existing recipients have to be re-vetted by this new national verifier?
So the national verifier will be, it'll be a fair amount of time coming along. We will have, as part of that process, we'll look into all the folks that are already receiving the subsidy. But a lot of that will be hammered out over the next few months as we turn to USAC to help us go through that process.
There was a filing from HUD about the Federal Public Housing Assistance Program. Has that been retained as one of the programs that would make you eligible for Lifeline?
It has.
And I just wanted to clarify on the availability of the subsidy, just on the question about timing. So as Jody Griffin, my colleague, mentioned in presenting the item, initially it's a sort of people can get the subsidy either for the broadband product or the voice product at the minimum standards. So it's going to depend, of course, on whether Lifeline providers immediately choose to be offering a Lifeline-supported broadband service or not. We can't at this point predict, but at least they would have the option of doing so on December 1st.
Do you anticipate they would, or they're going to, or?
We would certainly hope so. We think it'll increase over time, though. Obviously, there'll be a ramp up. But we certainly expect, given the demand for broadband and the interest in it.
Yeah, and the fact that they'd be getting the subsidy for providing the service. So.
Yes, yeah, we're certainly very optimistic.
Thanks.
There was one change that I noticed between the fact sheet that was circulated on the 10th, or the 10th? No, the 8th. And what we got today regarding the service standards. It said it set a minimum monthly fixed broadband usage allowance standard of 150 gigabytes and updated thereafter. The updated thereafter wasn't in the original fact sheet. What does that mean, and is that a change?
I don't think it's a change. So you're talking about the 150 on the fixed.
Yeah, and after 150
network.
it says and updated thereafter,
right,
which I take it means possibility for review or some kind of mandate for review, or?
There'll be a mechanism that will be regular to determine on a yearly basis whether the amount should be upped, and if so, by how much. And it just will be based on evolving standards of what a substantial majority of users are using.
It's not like an algorithm where if somebody had a formula that you're planning to use, they could just plug market data into and know what the answer is. It's more of a qualitative kind of
it's
judgment.
Not so much qualitative, but it would be based on data that we collect from industry.
Thank you.
Yes. Anything else? All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Time for dinner. Yeah.